Some families visit their dead regularly, but I'd never seen someone visit the wrong grave. My name is Director Rajesh Patel, and I have worked at Riverside Memorial Gardens in Austin, Texas for 18 years. As cemetery director, I oversee all operations, including family services, which means I'm familiar with our regular visitors, people who come weekly, monthly, on anniversaries and birthdays. I recognize their patterns, their grief, their rituals. It's part of respecting the mourning process. The woman visiting Vault Chamber 23B didn't fit any pattern I understood. I first noticed her on our security footage in early September. She appeared at dawn on a Tuesday, walking through the underground vault system with the confidence of someone who'd been there many times before. She carried a small bouquet of white roses, moved directly to Chamber 23B, and stood outside the vault door for approximately 15 minutes. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just stood there with her flowers, then placed them on the floor outside the chamber door and left. I checked our visitor logs. No sign-in for that morning. Our vault system is supposed to be locked from midnight to 7 a.m., accessible only with staff keycards. But the security footage clearly showed her entering through the main vault entrance at 6:04 a.m. The door simply opened for her. The next Tuesday, she returned. Same time, same route, same chamber. White roses again, 15 minutes of standing in silence, flowers placed outside the door. I started watching for her, reviewing footage every Tuesday morning, documenting her visits. She came without fail, every Tuesday at dawn for 6 consecutive weeks, always alone, always with white roses, always chamber 23B. In October, I decided to approach her. I arrived at the vault at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, waiting in my office near the entrance. When she entered at 6:04, I stepped into the corridor. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I help you?" She looked startled, but not frightened. A woman in her mid-50s, well-dressed, carrying that week's bouquet of white roses. Her expression shifted from surprise to something like resignation. "I'm just visiting my daughter," she said quietly. I introduced myself, explained that I was the cemetery director, asked which chamber her daughter was in so I could ensure her visits were properly accommodated. 23B, she said, gesturing down the corridor. "I come every Tuesday." I knew Chamber 23B. Knew it very well, actually, because I'd personally handled the burial arrangements. The vault contained Lawrence Hendricks, a 91-year-old man who died of natural causes 8 months earlier, retired accountant, widower, no children. I told her gently that there must be some confusion. Chamber 23B held a male deceased, elderly, no family connections to anyone named. I paused, realizing I didn't know her name. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Hendricks, and my daughter is Emily. She's been here since March." Hendricks. Same last name as the man in Chamber 23B. I asked her to come to my office, pulled up the burial records on my computer, showed her the details. Lawrence Hendricks, interred March 15th. Single occupancy vault chamber. No other burials scheduled or completed in 23B. Sarah studied the screen, her face pale. "That's my father-in-law," she said. "Larry. He died in March. But Emily." She trailed off, looking confused. "Emily died in March too. Same week. They were in a car accident together. I buried them both." I checked our records carefully. Only one Hendricks burial in March. Only Lawrence. No Emily Hendricks. No other Hendricks family members at all. I asked Sarah where she thought she'd buried her daughter. She described the funeral, clearly the service, the vault chamber, standing exactly where she'd been standing every Tuesday morning, Chamber 23B. But Emily Hendricks didn't exist in our records. I suggested we verify the vault chamber together. Sarah agreed, though her hands were shaking. We walked down to corridor 23, stood outside Chamber B. "This is where we held her service," Sarah said. "Right here. I remember standing in this exact spot, looking at her casket through the window. She was wearing her blue dress. I unlocked the chamber and opened the door. The vault window showed Lawrence Hendricks's casket, bronze finish, closed and sealed, exactly as it should be." Sarah stepped closer, peered through the window, and gasped, "That's not right. That's not her casket. Where is she?" I didn't know how to explain that her daughter had never been buried here, never been in our system at all. Instead, I asked if she had documentation, death certificate, burial contract, anything that would show Emily's interment. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos, found what she was looking for, and showed me. It was a photograph of a funeral service in our vault. I recognized Chamber 23B in the background. A casket sat in the center of the chamber, surrounded by flowers. The casket was white, smaller than Lawrence Hendricks's bronze one, a child's casket. "Emily was 9, Sarah whispered, staring at the photo. "She loved white roses. I bring them every week." I asked when this photo was taken. She checked the date stamp. March 17th, 2023, 7 months ago. I examined the photo more carefully. The chamber in the background was definitely 23B. I recognized the specific brick pattern, the vault door design, the corridor beyond, but the casket in the foreground didn't match our records. We'd buried Lawrence Hendricks on March 15th. Chamber 23B had been sealed immediately after his service. No other burial had occurred there. Yet Sarah had a photograph of a different funeral in that same chamber 2 days later. I spent the next week investigating, contacted other cemeteries in Austin, checked hospital records, searched for any documentation of Emily Hendricks's death, found nothing. No death certificate, no obituary, no record that Emily Hendricks had ever existed. But Sarah kept visiting. Every Tuesday at dawn, white roses in hand, standing outside Chamber 23B for 15 minutes before leaving her flowers and departing. I started reviewing older security footage, went back to March, searching for evidence of Emily's funeral service. Found the footage from March 17th, the date Sarah's photograph was taken. The video showed Chamber 23B on that date, showed a funeral service in progress, showed a white casket surrounded by flowers, exactly matching Sarah's photograph. But the timestamp was wrong. The funeral appeared to be happening at 6 a.m., the same time Sarah conducted her weekly visits, and the only person visible in the footage was Sarah herself, standing alone in the empty chamber, holding white roses, staring at something the camera couldn't see. I watched her stand there for 15 minutes in that March footage, watched her place flowers on the floor, watched her leave. The chamber had been empty. Lawrence Hendricks was already sealed in his vault space. There was no white casket, no service, no other mourners, just Sarah, visiting a daughter who wasn't there. I confronted her the next Tuesday, showed her the March footage, explained what I'd found. She watched the video silently, tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand," she said. "I remember the funeral. I remember planning it, choosing her casket, arranging the flowers. I remember standing here with my husband, with Larry, saying goodbye to our Emily. Larry. Lawrence Hendricks. I pulled up Lawrence's burial records again. Read through them carefully. No mention of a wife named Sarah. No mention of a granddaughter named Emily. He'd been listed as a widower with no surviving family. But in the personal effects inventory, there was one item that made me stop. A photograph found in Lawrence's wallet. Description: elderly man with young girl, approximately age 9, both smiling. Written on back: Larry and Emily, March 2023. The photograph had been buried with him. I asked Sarah if she had any photos of her father-in-law with her daughter. She nodded, pulled out her phone again, showed me dozens of pictures. Lawrence and Emily at the park. Lawrence and Emily baking cookies. Lawrence and Emily reading together. The last photo was dated March 13th, 2023, 2 days before Lawrence died. They were together that day, Sarah said softly. In the car. The accident killed them both instantly. We buried Larry first, then Emily 2 days later. I remember it clearly. But our records showed only one death, only one burial, only Lawrence Hendricks in Chamber 23B. I checked hospital records one more time, found the accident report from March 13th. Single vehicle collision, one fatality, Lawrence Hendricks, age 91, no other casualties listed. No, Emily. Sarah visits every Tuesday. I've stopped trying to convince her that her daughter isn't there. Stopped showing her the records that say Emily never existed. She needs to mourn. And who am I to say what's real for her? But last Tuesday, something changed. I was reviewing the security footage from her 6 a.m. visit, watched her walk to Chamber 23B, stand in her usual spot, hold her white roses. Then I saw something move in the corridor behind her, a small figure, child-sized, walking toward Chamber 23B from the opposite direction. The figure approached Sarah from behind, stood next to her for a moment, then reached up and touched her hand. Sarah didn't react, didn't seem to notice. The small figure turned and looked directly at the camera. A girl, approximately 9 years old, wearing a blue dress. She smiled at the camera, then faded from view. Sarah placed her white roses on the floor and left, just like always. I enhanced the footage, reviewed it frame by frame. The girl appeared for exactly 15 seconds, long enough for me to see her face clearly, long enough to recognize her from the photographs in Sarah's phone. Emily Hendricks, visiting Chamber 23B, where her grandfather rests, where she rests too, somehow, in a burial that never officially happened. Sarah came yesterday, Tuesday morning, 6 a.m., white roses in hand. This time, there were 2 bouquets waiting outside Chamber 23B when she arrived. One from her, and one already there. Small white roses, tied with a blue ribbon, fresh.
The Gulf has been counting since before anyone thought to count back. Granville Gulf is not a town. It's a wound in the earth, an 11-mile glacial notch carved through the Green Mountains, where Route 100 drops nearly 1,000 feet in elevation before climbing again toward Warren. The road is narrow, hemmed by moss-covered cliffs on one side and the headwaters of the White River on the other. In summer, tourists pull over to photograph Moss Glen Falls and the old-growth hemlocks that block out the sky. In winter, the road becomes something else entirely. The state closes it during heavy storms, but the closures are often late, sometimes by hours, sometimes by days. The Abenaki called this place Wabigwaskik, the passage where sound dies. Early French trappers avoided the Gulf entirely, rerouting their journeys through Roxbury Gap despite the additional distance. Their journals, preserved in the Vermont Historical Society archives, mention a stillness that presses upon the ears and a darkness that does not behave as darkness should. One entry from 1743 describes a trapper named Bouchard who entered the Gulf on Christmas morning and emerged 3 days later, 17 miles north, with no memory of the journey and frost damage to his hands that suggested he had been stationary in sub-zero temperatures for at least 48 hours. He never spoke of what happened. He never trapped again. Route 100 was paved through the Gulf in 1937, part of a federal works project that employed over 200 men for 18 months. Construction logs from that period note unusual equipment failures, surveying errors that couldn't be explained by terrain alone, and the resignation of 3 foremen who cited personal reasons for leaving the project. The road was completed ahead of schedule despite the setbacks. No one has ever satisfactorily explained how. The first documented disappearance of the modern era occurred on December 29, 1971. Walter Henriksen, 54, was a dairy farmer from Moortown who had driven Route 100 through the Gulf hundreds of times over 3 decades. He left his brother's house in Hancock at 2:45 in the morning, heading home after a late Christmas gathering. His truck was found the following afternoon near the Moss Glen Falls trailhead, driver's door open, engine cold, and the radio dial turned to 87.3, a frequency that, according to FCC records, has never been assigned to any broadcast station in Vermont. Henriksen's wallet was on the passenger seat. His boots were still in the footwell. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the dashboard, frozen solid. Footprints led from the driver's door approximately 14 feet toward the tree line, then stopped. Search teams with dogs found no continuation of the trail. It was as if Henriksen had simply ceased to exist at that point in the snow. His wife, Edna, told investigators that Walter had called her at 3:12 a.m. from a payphone, though no payphone existed within 18 miles of where his truck was found. The call lasted less than 30 seconds. He said he had to stop because of the lights, Edna recalled. I asked him what lights. He said, the ones that aren't moving. Then the line went dead. The Henriksen case was classified as a missing persons investigation. It was never solved. Over the following 48 years, 36 more travelers would vanish under nearly identical circumstances. Miriam Ostrowski, a nurse returning from a late shift at Gifford Medical Center, disappeared on December 26, 1979. Her Chevrolet was found near the reservation's northern boundary, radio set to 87.3. Gregory Fontaine, a graduate student in forestry at the University of Vermont, vanished on December 30, 1984. His Jeep was discovered 2 miles from the Moss Glen Falls parking area. Radio 87.3. Time on his stopped wristwatch, 3:17 a.m. In 1991, a family of 3, Douglas and Irene Cafferty, and their teenage son, Michael, disappeared on New Year's Eve. Their station wagon was found with all 3 doors hanging open, seats still warm to the touch despite the 15-degree air, and the radio dial tuned to a frequency that shouldn't have existed. By 2000, investigators had documented 23 disappearances fitting the pattern. All occurred during the Hollow Week. All vehicles were found with radios set to 87.3. All showed evidence of sudden, inexplicable abandonment, and all occurred where time of departure or last contact could be established within minutes of 3:17 a.m. In 2006, a retired state trooper named Eugene Landry began compiling a private dossier on the Granville Gulf cases. Landry had worked 2 of the disappearances himself, Fontaine in '84 and a traveling salesman named Arthur Desmond in '97, and the similarities had troubled him for years. What got me wasn't the frequency thing, though that's strange enough, Landry said in a 2012 interview with a Burlington Free Press reporter. It was the footprints. Every single case, you'd find prints leading away from the vehicle, sometimes 8 feet, sometimes 20, and then nothing. Not covered by snow, not doubled back, just ended. Like the person stepped off the edge of the world. Landry filed a Freedom of Information request for all documentation related to Route 100 maintenance, closures, and reported incidents within the Granville Gulf corridor. What he received was heavily redacted, 47 pages reduced to 11, with entire sections blacked out under exemptions citing public safety considerations. One unredacted passage from a 1993 internal memo read, "Recommend against installation of cellular repeater towers within the Gulf corridor pending further study of atmospheric anomalies affecting radio propagation. Current conditions not conducive to standard broadcast parameters." Landry requested clarification on what atmospheric anomalies the memo referenced. His request was denied. 3 months later, the Vermont Department of Public Safety reassigned his FOIA case to a different office. It has been pending ever since. Dr. Helena Marchetti, an atmospheric physicist at Dartmouth College, analyzed the 87.3 frequency anomaly at Landry's request. Her findings, never formally published, suggested that the frequency fell within a narrow band theoretically capable of producing infrasound sound waves below the threshold of human hearing that can cause disorientation, anxiety, and in extreme cases, visual hallucinations. The question isn't whether such a frequency could affect human perception, Marchetti told Landry. The question is, what could possibly be broadcasting it in a wilderness area with no transmission infrastructure? She declined to speculate further. When Landry contacted her for a follow-up interview in 2014, her office informed him that she had taken an indefinite research sabbatical. Her current whereabouts remain unknown. The most recent confirmed disappearance occurred on December 27, 2019. Sandra Ekström, 31, was a Swedish national visiting relatives in Vermont for the holidays. She left her cousin's home in Waitsfield at approximately 2:45 a.m., despite her family's objections to the late hour and the route she intended to take. According to her cousin, Margareta Dahl, Sandra had seemed agitated throughout the evening, repeatedly checking her phone and mentioning that she needed to see it for herself. "I asked her what she meant," Dahl told investigators. "She said she'd read something online about Granville Gulf, something about a frequency. She was a sound engineer, acoustics, radio waves, that sort of thing. She said it didn't make sense, and she wanted to record it." Ekström's rental car was found on December 28th, near the trailhead for the Long Trail crossing. Her professional audio equipment was still in the trunk, untouched. Her phone was on the passenger seat, battery dead. When investigators charged and examined it, they found she had made a recording beginning at 3:14 a.m. and ending abruptly at 3:17. The recording captured 3 minutes of ambient noise, wind, the idle engine, the creak of the car's frame in the cold. At the 2-minute, 41-second mark, a faint tone becomes audible. It rises slowly in pitch over the following 32 seconds before cutting off mid-wave. Audio analysts who examined the recording described the tone as mechanically precise and inconsistent with any known natural or artificial source. One analyst, speaking off the record, noted that the frequency matched 87.3 megahertz exactly, not approximately, not within tolerance, but precisely. "That shouldn't be possible," he said. "A handheld recorder can't capture radio frequencies. It can only capture sound waves. Whatever made that tone, it wasn't a broadcast. It was something in the air itself." Ekström's footprints led 12 feet from her driver's door, then stopped. The Green Mountain National Forest Service has never issued a formal advisory about Granville Gulf. Route 100 remains open during the Hollow Week, weather permitting. No additional signage warns travelers about the corridor's history, and no official record acknowledges the 37 disappearances as a connected pattern. In 2021, Eugene Landry published his dossier privately, distributing copies to libraries and historical societies throughout Vermont. Most declined to add it to their collections. The Vermont State Archives accepted a copy, but cataloged it under Unverified Claims Regional Folklore. Landry died in 2023 at the age of 81. His obituary did not mention his research. Last December, a hiker named Paul Drummond was walking the long trail through the Gulf when he noticed something unusual near mile marker 7 on Route 100. It was a radio, an old transistor model, rusted and weathered, sitting upright in the snow roughly 15 feet from the road. The dial was set to 87.3. Drummond photographed it but did not touch it. When he returned with a ranger 3 hours later, the radio was gone. The snow where it had sat was undisturbed, as if nothing had ever been there at all. The Gulf remains as it has always been, narrow, silent, deep. The cliffs lean inward. The river whispers beneath the ice. And somewhere in the dark spaces between frequencies, the count continues. 37, and waiting. She was waving like someone who expected to be saved. Smuggler's Notch is one of the highest mountain passes in Vermont, a serpentine corridor of hairpin turns and sheer granite walls that climbs to 2,162 feet before descending into the Lamoille Valley. Route 108 threads through it like a held breath, squeezing between boulders the size of houses and cliff faces that block out the sun for most of the winter day. The road is narrow. The shoulders are narrower. In places, there is no shoulder at all, only rock and air, and the long drop into the ravine below. The notch takes its name from the smugglers who used it during the War of 1812 and Prohibition, men who moved contraband through the mountains because the pass was too treacherous for authorities to patrol. Even now, the state closes Route 108 from late November through mid-April, declaring the road impassable once snow accumulates beyond the capacity of local plows. But closures are reactive, not preventive. The road remains open until conditions force it shut, and conditions in the notch can change in minutes. The Abenaki avoided the pass entirely. Their trails skirted the mountains to the east and west, adding miles to their journeys rather than crossing through. When asked why by early European settlers, they offered only silence. The few recorded explanations, filtered through missionary translations, mention a place where the mountain watches and stone that remembers what it takes. Geologists classify Smuggler's Notch as a glacial cirque, a bowl-shaped depression carved by Ice Age glaciers that left behind the massive boulders scattered across the pass. Some of these boulders show unusual weathering patterns, inconsistent with their estimated age. Others contain mineral deposits that don't match any known formation in the Green Mountains. A 1967 survey by the Vermont Geological Survey flagged these anomalies for further study. The follow-up study was never conducted. No explanation for the cancellation appears in any available record. Caroline Ashworth was 34 years old when she disappeared. She was a financial analyst from Hartford, Connecticut, divorced, no children, known among her colleagues for her precision and her solitude. She had booked a solo ski trip to Stowe for the week of Christmas 2008, her first vacation in 3 years, according to her assistant. On the morning of December 23rd, she checked out of her hotel at 7:15 a.m. Her rental car, a silver Toyota Camry, was logged leaving the hotel parking garage at 7:22. She told the front desk clerk she was planning to take the scenic route back to Connecticut, though her GPS later showed she had programmed a destination not in Connecticut but in Jeffersonville, Vermont, a town on the far side of Smuggler's Notch that she had no known connection to. At approximately 9:40 a.m., a FedEx driver named Marcus Thibodeau was descending Route 108 from the Jeffersonville side when he saw a woman standing on the shoulder near the summit. Snow had begun falling an hour earlier, and visibility was deteriorating, but Thibodeau was certain of what he saw. She was wearing a red coat, he told investigators. Bright red, like a cardinal. You couldn't miss it against all that white. She was waving at me, not flagging me down. Exactly. More like greeting me. Like she knew me. Like she was happy to see me. Thibodeau slowed, but did not stop. The shoulder at that point was barely 2 feet wide, and he was driving a delivery truck with limited maneuverability. He waved back and continued down the mountain, intending to report the stranded motorist once he reached cell service in Jeffersonville. By the time he made the call at 10:15, the Vermont Agency of Transportation had already closed Route 108. A blizzard warning was in effect. No vehicles would pass through the notch until plows cleared it 2 days later. The silver Camry was found on December 25th at 2:40 in the afternoon, approximately 300 yards from where Thibodeau had seen the woman. It was parked, not abandoned, but parked in a narrow pullout used by summer hikers. The doors were locked. The engine was cold. The keys were in the ignition. Caroline Ashworth was not inside. State Trooper Denise Pelletier was among the first responders to reach the vehicle. Her report, filed that evening, describes the scene with unusual detail. The car appeared to have been there for some time, Pelletier wrote. Snow accumulation on the roof and hood suggested at least 36 hours of exposure. Interior was undisturbed. Purse on passenger seat, wallet inside with cash and credit cards intact. Cell phone on dashboard, battery dead. No signs of struggle or forced entry. What Pelletier found outside the car was more difficult to explain. A single set of footprints led from the driver's door toward the cliff face on the eastern side of the road. The prints were consistent with women's winter boots, size 7, matching a pair found in the Camry's trunk. They proceeded in a straight line for approximately 47 feet before terminating at the base of a granite outcropping. The rock face at that point rises vertically for over 200 feet. There are no handholds, no ledges, no possible route of ascent. The footprints did not turn. They did not double back. They simply stopped, as if Caroline Ashworth had walked directly into the stone and continued through it. "I've seen a lot of tracks in snow," Pelletier said during a 2012 interview for a Vermont public radio segment on cold cases. "I've seen people try to cover their trails, backtrack, throw off dogs, but I've never seen anything like that. It was like she knew exactly where she was going, and then she was just gone." The investigation that followed raised more questions than it answered. Caroline Ashworth's family, her mother, Eleanor, and her younger brother, Stephen, were contacted on December 26th. They confirmed that Caroline had been planning a ski trip but expressed confusion about her intended route home. She hated mountain driving, Stephen Ashworth told investigators. She would never have taken that road voluntarily, and she definitely wouldn't have done it alone. In a storm, that wasn't Caroline. When asked about the red coat, Eleanor Ashworth became visibly distressed. "Caroline didn't own a red coat," she said. "She never wore red. She was superstitious about it. Something from when she was a child. She said red was the color you wore when you wanted to be found." Investigators searched the Camry thoroughly. They found no red coat. They found no red clothing of any kind. Among her possessions was a single photograph, tucked into the sun visor, showing Caroline as a young girl standing beside an older woman in front of a white farmhouse. The back of the photograph bore an inscription in faded handwriting: "Grandma's House, Jeffersonville, 1982. Eleanor Ashworth confirmed that her mother, Caroline's grandmother, had lived in Jeffersonville until her death in 1989. The farmhouse had been sold that same year. County records showed it had changed hands 3 more times before being demolished in 2001 to make way for a condominium development. Caroline had been 4 years old the last time she visited. She had no memory of the house, according to her mother. She had never mentioned it. In January 2009, investigators obtained GPS data from the Camry's navigation system. The route Caroline had programmed led not to any existing address in Jeffersonville, but to a set of coordinates approximately 2 miles from the town center coordinates that corresponded precisely to the location of her grandmother's farmhouse before its demolition. The navigation system showed that Caroline had entered these coordinates at 6:47 a.m. on December 23rd, approximately 30 minutes before she checked out of her hotel. No other destinations had been programmed. No other routes had been searched. She knew exactly where she was going, said Detective Arthur Holt, who took over the case in March 2009. The question is how and why. Holt submitted a formal request to the Vermont Agency of Transportation for any records of unusual incidents in the Smuggler's Notch corridor. The response included a brief mention of a 1951 report involving a woman found wandering the pass on Christmas morning, disoriented and wearing clothing inconsistent with the season. The woman was never identified. She was taken to a hospital in Burlington and discharged 3 days later. Her file contains no photograph, no fingerprints, and no record of where she went after leaving the facility. The only description of her clothing was a single word: red. Holt attempted to locate additional records of the 1951 incident. He found none. The hospital had purged files from that era during a records consolidation in 1978. The state police archives contained no corresponding case number. It was as if the incident had been documented just thoroughly enough to prove it had happened, and no more. Marcus Thibodeau continued driving for FedEx until his retirement in 2020. He never forgot the woman in the red coat. "I think about her every Christmas," he said in a 2018 interview. "I think about how she looked at me when she waved. She wasn't scared. She wasn't cold. She looked relieved, like she'd been waiting a long time, and she finally saw what she was looking for." When asked what he believed happened to her, Thibodeau paused for a long moment. "I don't know where she went," he said, "but I don't think she was lost. I think she was exactly where she meant to be. I think she found what she came for." The case of Caroline Ashworth remains officially open. No body has ever been recovered. No evidence of foul play has ever been identified. The footprints in the snow melted with the spring thaw, and the cliff face where they ended has never been examined by geological survey. In 2015, a hiker reported finding a red woolen button near the base of the granite outcropping. It was weathered, sun-faded, and appeared to have been there for years. The hiker photographed it but did not collect it. When rangers investigated the following week, the button was gone. The mountain keeps what it takes. The stone remembers. And somewhere in the pass, in the space between rock and air and the silence the Abenaki knew to fear, a woman in a red coat is still waving. She waves like someone who has finally been found. The mile marker moved, but the vanishing point stayed exactly where it was. Route 2 runs east to west across Vermont's northern tier, connecting the Connecticut River Valley to Lake Champlain through a landscape of dairy farms, sugar maples, and towns that seem to shrink a little more each decade. Between Danville and Street, Johnsbury, the road follows the Passumpsic River Valley, a gentle corridor compared to the mountain passes to the south, unremarkable in most ways, forgotten in others. The stretch near milepost 112 is neither scenic nor dangerous. There are no sharp curves, no steep grades, no notorious accident sites. The shoulder is wide and well maintained. Cellular service is reliable. The nearest house is visible from the road, its porch light burning through winter nights like a lighthouse marking safe harbor. And yet, the town of Danville was settled in 1784 by migrants from Connecticut who found the valley's gentle terrain amenable to farming. They built their homes close together, as New Englanders did, and they built their roads in straight lines where the land allowed. Route 2 follows, in places, the original cart paths those settlers carved through the forest paths that were laid out not by surveyors, but by following the routes that cattle naturally chose. Local historians note that the cattle avoided one particular meadow on the western edge of town. They would walk around it, adding nearly a quarter mile to their journey, rather than cross directly. The farmers eventually stopped trying to correct them. When the road was paved in 1926, engineers routed it along the meadow's northern edge rather than through its center. No explanation for the cattle's behavior was ever documented. The meadow itself is unremarkable, flat, grassy in summer, buried in snow each winter. The only feature that distinguishes it from the surrounding fields is a small depression near its center, roughly circular, approximately 30 feet in diameter. Soil samples taken in 1958 showed unusually low nitrogen levels and an absence of earthworms. The agronomist who conducted the study noted the anomaly, but offered no hypothesis. His report was filed with the county extension office and never referenced again. Milepost 112 was installed in 1961 as part of a federal highway standardization program. It marked a point on Route 2, approximately 140 yards from the eastern edge of the meadow. 22 years later, people began to disappear. The first documented case occurred on December 25, 1983. Franklin Morse, 61, was a retired mathematics teacher returning home to Montpelier after Christmas dinner with his daughter's family in Street Johnsbury. He left at approximately 10:30 p.m., traveling westbound on Route 2. His Oldsmobile was found the following morning on the shoulder near milepost 112. Driver's door open, engine off, headlights still on, but battery nearly dead. Morse was not inside. His coat was draped over the passenger seat. His wallet was in the glove box. A thermos of coffee sat in the cup holder, still warm to the touch, when the first trooper arrived at 6:15 a.m. Footprints in the light snow led from the driver's door toward the meadow to the south. They proceeded approximately 70 feet before becoming indistinct, not ending exactly, but fading, as if whoever made them had gradually become lighter with each step until they no longer left a mark. Search teams covered the meadow and surrounding woods for 3 days. Canine units lost the scent at the same point where the footprints disappeared. No trace of Franklin Morse was ever found. His daughter, Rebecca Morse Hartley, told investigators that her father had called her from his car at 10:52 p.m. to say he'd arrived safely in Danville and would be home within the hour. "He sounded fine," she said. "Normal. He said the roads were clear and he was making good time. Then he said something about the radio." Asked to elaborate, Rebecca recalled that her father mentioned the radio had started picking up interference near the Danville town line. He said it sounded like voices, but not in English. He thought maybe it was a Canadian station bleeding through. The call ended normally. Franklin Morse was never heard from again. The second disappearance occurred 4 years later, on Christmas night, 1987. Patricia Kowalczyk, 44, was a veterinarian from Burlington who had spent the holiday with her sister in Barnett. She departed at approximately 11:15 p.m., westbound on Route 2. Her pickup truck was found the next morning, within 50 yards of where Franklin Morse's car had been discovered. The pattern was identical: door open, engine off, personal effects undisturbed, footprints leading toward the meadow and fading before reaching it. In 1992, a traveling salesman named Gordon Blackwell vanished under the same circumstances. In 1997, a young couple, Jeremy and Dana Whitfield, disappeared together. Their Subaru found with both doors open and 2 sets of footprints converging into one before dissolving into the snow. By 2001, 5 people had vanished within 100 yards of milepost 112, all on Christmas night, all traveling westbound, all leaving footprints that pointed toward the meadow and faded before arrival. The Vermont State Police opened a formal investigation in 2002. Detective Sergeant Marjorie Saunders was assigned to lead the inquiry, tasked with identifying any connection between the victims beyond the location and date of their disappearances. She found none. The victims ranged in age from 23 to 61. They came from different towns, different professions, different backgrounds. They had no mutual acquaintances, no shared history, no common enemies. The only thing they had in common was the road they traveled and the night they chose to travel it. "I've worked homicides, missing persons, cold cases going back decades," Saunders said in a 2009 interview. This was different. There was no thread to pull, no motive to trace, just a place and a pattern, and the complete absence of anything that made sense. In 2003, the Vermont Agency of Transportation received an unusual request from the state police: relocate milepost 112. The request was not filed through normal channels. It came directly from the Commissioner of Public Safety and was marked expedited, no public comment period required. The stated justification was ongoing investigation into highway safety concerns. No further details were provided. The original marker was removed on January 15, 2003, and replaced with a new marker positioned approximately 8 feet to the west. The relocation was not announced. No maps were updated. The change was so minor that no one who hadn't been specifically looking for it would have noticed. On December 25, 2003, nothing happened. The meadow sat quiet under fresh snow. No cars were found abandoned. No footprints marked the field. The pattern, it seemed, had been broken. But on Christmas night, 2006, a retired postal worker named Elias Drummond vanished on Route 2, not at the new milepost, 112, but at a point 87 yards to the east. The precise location of the original marker, Drummond's car was found on the shoulder, door open, engine off, footprints leading toward the meadow, the same trajectory, the same gradual fade. The mile marker had moved. The disappearances had not. The Agency of Transportation relocated the marker again in 2007, this time positioning it 12 feet to the east of its original location. The theory, never officially stated, seemed to be that if the marker couldn't be placed at the vanishing point, perhaps it could be placed away from it, a warning of sorts. For those who knew to look, for 4 years, the strategy appeared to work. No disappearances were reported on Christmas night from 2007 through 2010. Then, on December 25, 2011, Miriam Ostrander disappeared. She was a 47-year-old librarian from Hardwick, driving home from a holiday concert in Lyndonville. Her Honda Civic was found on the shoulder of Route 2, approximately 20 feet south of the current milepost 112, which itself sat 20 feet from the original surveyed position. The footprints led toward the meadow. They faded at the same point they always had. Detective Saunders, by then retired, was contacted by investigators seeking her insight. Her response, preserved in the case file, was a single sentence: "You can't move the point. You can only move the sign." Following Ostrander's disappearance, the Agency of Transportation stopped updating the location of milepost 112 on official maps. The physical marker remains where it was placed. In 2007, a green rectangle with white numbers, standing in a field 20 feet from the road, visited only by the occasional surveyor or the rare investigator who still believes the case can be solved. The original position, the point where cattle refuse to walk, where soil holds no worms, where 7 people walked into a field and never walked out, remains unmarked. There is no sign, no memorial, no indication that anything ever happened there at all. Local residents have learned to avoid Route 2 on Christmas night. Those who must travel it drive eastbound when possible, though no eastbound traveler has ever disappeared. The pattern holds: westbound only, Christmas only, within 100 yards of a point that exists on no current map. In 2018, a documentary filmmaker named Sarah Lindgren obtained permission to install motion-activated cameras at the original marker location. The cameras recorded continuously from December 23rd through December 26th. The footage showed nothing unusual on the 23rd or 24th. On Christmas night, beginning at 11:47 p.m., all 4 cameras experienced simultaneous static interference, lasting approximately 12 minutes. When the footage cleared, the snow in the meadow appeared undisturbed. No cars passed on the road. No figures appeared in the frame, but a sound was captured faint at the edge of audibility, lasting less than 3 seconds. Audio analysts described it as consistent with distant human vocalization, possibly a word or name, though the specific content could not be determined. Lindgren submitted the footage to the Vermont State Police. It was acknowledged, but not entered into evidence. The case remains officially open, officially unsolved, officially unexplained. The current milepost 112 stands in its field, marking a point that isn't the point, measuring a distance that leads nowhere safe. The meadow waits beneath its blanket of snow. The cattle knew to walk around it, The road was built to avoid it. But on Christmas night, something in that empty field still draws travelers off the road. They stop their cars. They open their doors. They walk towards something no one has ever seen and no one has ever returned to describe. 7 people have followed that path. The mile marker can be moved. The road can be mapped. The pattern can be documented and studied and filed away in archives no one reads. But the vanishing point stays exactly where it has always been, patient, precise, waiting for the next traveler to stop and answer whatever call the others heard. The meadow remembers. It has been remembering for a very long time. The candles were still burning when the searchers found them, and that was the part no one could explain. Stratton Mountain rises in southern Vermont like a slow exhalation. 3,936 feet of spruce and birch and granite. Its summit, often lost in clouds that settle over the Green Mountains and refuse to lift for days. The town of Stratton sits at its base, a community of fewer than 200 year-round residents who share the valley with ski resorts, vacation homes, and the kind of silence that accumulates in places where winter lasts longer than it should. Stratton Mountain Road connects the village center to the scattered homesteads on the mountain's lower slopes. In summer, it's a pleasant drive through dappled forest. In winter, it becomes something else, a narrow corridor of compacted snow and ice, bordered by trees that lean inward as if listening, where the sun sets early and the darkness that follows feels older than the darkness elsewhere. The first Congregational Church of Stratton was established in 1837, one of the earliest Protestant congregations in Windham County. Its traditions have changed little in nearly 2 centuries. Services are held each Sunday at 10 a.m. The Christmas Eve candlelight service begins at 7 p.m. And every year, on the night before Christmas, a group of volunteers walks the mountain road to bring carols and gifts to those too elderly or infirm to attend the service. The tradition began in 1912, when the pastor's wife organized a small group to visit a widow who lived alone on the upper road. It continued through 2 world wars, through the Depression, through decades of change that transformed the rest of Vermont, while Stratton remained much as it had always been. By 1994, the Christmas caroling walk had been unbroken for 82 years. It has not been attempted since. The group that set out on the evening of December 24, 1994, consisted of 9 members of the congregation. Howard and Lillian Pemberton, ages 67 and 64, were retired school teachers who had participated in the caroling walk for over 30 years. Their daughter, Christine Pemberton Walsh, 41, had joined them along with her husband, Daniel Walsh, 43. The Marshfield family, Robert, 49, his wife Constance, 46, and their teenage children, Andrew and Elizabeth, 17 and 15, completed the adult contingent. The youngest member was Timothy Brennan, age 12, the grandson of the woman they were visiting. They departed from the church at 6:15 p.m., carrying battery-powered lanterns, song sheets, and a basket of wrapped gifts. The walk to Helen Brennan's cottage was approximately 1.5 miles, a journey of 40 minutes under normal conditions, slightly longer given the snow that had fallen throughout the day. Helen Brennan, 89, had been a member of First Congregational for over 60 years. She was in hospice care, attended by a visiting nurse named Rosemary Vance, and had requested that the carolers come to her that year rather than foregoing the tradition. Her grandson Timothy had insisted on joining the group, wanting to surprise her with his presence. The carolers were expected to arrive at Helen's cottage by 7 p.m. at the latest. They never did. At 7:45 p.m., Rosemary Vance called the church to inquire about the carolers' delay. The pastor, Reverend David Holbrook, assumed the group had stopped to rest or had taken a longer route to avoid an icy patch. He assured Vance they would arrive soon. By 8:30, he was concerned. By 9, he had organized a search party. The first searchers departed from the church at 9:15, following the route the carolers would have taken. They carried flashlights and called out names as they walked. The night was clear and cold, approximately 12 degrees, with a half moon providing enough light to see the road ahead. At 9:47, a searcher named Philip Guerrero rounded a bend approximately 3/4 of a mile from the church and stopped. In the middle of the road, arranged in a perfect circle approximately 15 feet in diameter, stood 9 lanterns. Each lantern contained a candle, not the battery-powered lights the carolers had carried, but actual wax candles, white, approximately 8 inches tall. Each candle was burning steadily despite the open air and the cold. There was no other sign of the carolers. No footprints led to the circle. No footprints led away. The snow on the road surface was undisturbed in all directions, as if the lanterns had been placed there from above or had simply materialized where they stood. Guerrero later described the scene to investigators. The candles weren't flickering. There was no wind, but still candles outdoors. In December, they should have been guttering. These were burning straight up, like they were indoors, like they were protected by something I couldn't see. He did not approach the circle. He returned to the church and reported what he had found. The Windham County Sheriff's Office arrived at 11:20 p.m. Deputies photographed the scene, measured the distances, and documented the arrangement of the lanterns. Each was positioned at exactly equal intervals around the circle's circumference, a precision that one deputy noted would have required surveying equipment to achieve. The candles continued to burn throughout the documentation process. One deputy, Margaret Fairbanks, attempted to extinguish a single candle by covering it with her gloved hand. The flame did not diminish. She held her hand over it for approximately 30 seconds before withdrawing. "It wasn't hot," Fairbanks said in her report. "My glove should have been singed. It wasn't. The flame was there, but it wasn't, behaving like fire." At 12:05 a.m., approximately 6 hours after the candles should have exhausted their fuel, all 9 flames extinguished simultaneously. Deputies watching the scene reported no wind, no sound, no visible cause. The candles simply stopped burning, all at once, as if a switch had been thrown. When investigators examined the candles afterward, they found them completely intact. No wax had melted. The wicks showed no charring. It was as if they had never been lit at all. The search for the 9 carolers continued for 11 days. Ground teams covered every accessible trail on the lower mountain. Helicopter surveys scanned the forest canopy for any sign of color or movement. Cadaver dogs were brought in from New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Divers checked the frozen surface of nearby Stratton Pond after a tip suggested the group might have wandered off course. Nothing was found. No clothing, no footprints beyond the circle, no physical evidence that 9 people had ever walked that road. The basket of gifts was never recovered. The song sheets were never found. The battery-powered lanterns the carolers had actually carried, as opposed to the candle-bearing lanterns found in the circle, were never located. Interviews with congregation members revealed that no one had seen the group after they departed the church. No passing vehicles had encountered them on the road. No residents along the route had heard singing or seen lights. For approximately 90 minutes, 9 people had walked a road they knew well, in conditions that were cold but not dangerous, and had vanished without leaving a single trace. The only witness who claimed to have any knowledge of their fate was Helen Brennan herself. Rosemary Vance, the hospice nurse attending Helen Brennan, provided a statement to investigators on December 26th. According to Vance, Helen had become agitated at approximately 7:15 p.m. on Christmas Eve, insisting that she could hear the carolers approaching. Vance heard nothing, but attributed Helen's claim to the medication she was taking for pain management. She said they were singing "O Holy Night," Vance recalled. "She asked me to open the window so she could hear them better. I told her it was too cold, but she kept asking. She said they were right outside." Vance eventually opened the window a crack, hoping to calm her patient. She heard only wind and the creak of trees, but Helen smiled. She said, "They're here. They made it. Timothy is with them." Vance paused in her statement, composing herself. She was so happy. She closed her eyes and just listened. For hours, every time I checked on her, She was awake, eyes closed, smiling, like she was at a concert. Helen Brennan died at 5:47 a.m. on December 25th, approximately the same time. Investigators later noted that dawn began to break over the valley. Her death was peaceful, expected, and unremarkable in all medical respects. The last words she spoke, according to Vance, were, "They sang all night. Tell them thank you. Tell them I heard every note." Her grandson Timothy's body was never recovered. Neither were the bodies of the 8 adults who walked with him into the darkness. In the years since the disappearance, several attempts have been made to explain what happened on Stratton Mountain Road. A professor of atmospheric science at the University of Vermont suggested that an unusual temperature inversion might have created conditions that disoriented the group, leading them off the road and into the wilderness, where they succumbed to exposure. This theory did not explain the absence of footprints, the impossible candles, or the fact that 9 experienced hikers, including several who had walked the road dozens of times, could have become lost on a route with no intersections or turnoffs. A retired FBI profiler proposed that the group had been abducted by persons unknown, the candle circle staged as a distraction. This theory did not explain how an abduction could have occurred without leaving any physical evidence, how 9 people could have been subdued silently in an open area, or who would have had both the motive and the means to execute such an operation in rural Vermont on Christmas Eve. The church offered no official explanation. Reverend Holbrook conducted a memorial service for the 9 carolers on January 7, 1995. He spoke of faith, of mystery, of the limits of human understanding. He did not speculate about what had happened. He did not encourage others to do so. The caroling tradition was suspended indefinitely following the disappearance. Some congregation members have suggested reviving it over the years. None of these suggestions have gained support. The section of Stratton Mountain Road where the lanterns were found has changed little since 1994. The trees still lean inward. The darkness still falls early. In winter, the snow accumulates in drifts that narrow the road to a single lane. In 2008, a couple driving home from a Christmas party reported seeing lights in the woods near the site, small, flickering, arranged in what appeared to be a circular formation. They did not stop to investigate. When they reported the sighting to the sheriff's office, a deputy was dispatched to check the location. He found nothing. No lights, no lanterns, no evidence of human presence. In 2016, a hiker exploring the area in late December claimed to have heard singing echoing through the valley, faint, distant, recognizable as a Christmas carol. Though he could not identify which one, he searched for the source for over an hour before the sound faded. "It was beautiful," he told a local newspaper, "but it was wrong. The direction kept changing. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once and nowhere at all." Helen Brennan's cottage still stands on the upper road, though it has been vacant since her death. The current owner, a businessman from Boston who uses it as a vacation property, has never spent a Christmas there. He has never explained why. And somewhere on Stratton Mountain Road, in the space where 9 lanterns once burned with flames that cast no heat and consumed no wax, the snow falls each December and covers whatever remains. The carolers set out on a journey of 1.5 miles. They traveled less than 1 before they stopped. No one knows why they stopped. No one knows what they saw. No one knows where they went when they stepped out of the circle of light and into whatever was waiting beyond it. But Helen Brennan heard them singing until dawn, and in a valley where sound carries strangely, and the darkness remembers what it takes, that may be the only testimony that matters. The package was the only thing missing, and that was the part that didn't make sense. The Bennington Triangle has earned its reputation through decades of unexplained disappearances, hikers who stepped off trails and never returned, hunters who vanished within sight of their companions, a college student who walked into the wilderness on a clear afternoon and was never seen again. The cases span from 1945 to 1950, a concentrated burst of vanishings that gave the region its name and its mythology. But the triangle didn't stop claiming people in 1950. It simply became quieter about it. Woodford Hollow runs through the heart of the triangle, a narrow valley carved by Bowles Brook, shadowed by Glastonbury Mountain to the north and Bald Mountain to the south. Route 9, the Molly Stark Trail, passes through it on its way from Bennington to Brattleboro, rising and falling through terrain that has never been fully mapped. The hollow itself is dense with hemlock and birch, the kind of forest that swallows sound and holds darkness even at midday. The town of Woodford, population 347 in the 1980 census, exists mostly along Route 9, a scattering of houses, a general store, a volunteer fire station. In winter, the population drops further as summer residents board up their cabins and retreat to the lowlands. Those who remain are the kind of people who don't ask too many questions about the woods that surround them. The Abenaki called Glastonbury Mountain Mozo de Biwadso, the mountain that eats people. Early settlers recorded stories of strange lights on the ridgeline, of compasses that spun without cause, of hunting dogs that refused to enter certain clearings. The Long Trail, which crosses the summit, has been rerouted 3 times since its original survey in 1912. The official reason for each reroute was erosion control. The unofficial reason, according to Green Mountain Club archives, was that hikers reported consistent difficulty navigating the original path, despite adequate trail markers and favorable conditions. Into this landscape, every day for 11 years, Daniel Marsh drove his mail route. Daniel Marsh was 43 years old in December 1987. He had worked for the United States Postal Service since 1976, assigned to rural Route 7 out of the Bennington Post Office, a loop that covered approximately 68 miles through Woodford, Searsburg, and the outlying areas of Glastonbury. By all accounts, Marsh was methodical, reliable, and familiar with his territory to an unusual degree. He knew which driveways were plowed and which would trap his truck. He knew which dogs would bark and which would bite. He knew the hollow in all seasons, all weathers, all hours of diminishing winter light. His supervisor, Patricia Osborne, described him as the last person who would ever get lost. On December 26, 1987, Marsh departed the Bennington Post Office at 7:45 a.m. with a full load of packages, the post-Christmas backlog of returns, late gifts, and ordinary correspondence. He completed the first half of his route without incident, stopping at the Woodford General Store at approximately 11:15 to purchase coffee and a sandwich, as he did every Friday. The store's owner, Clement Farrow, was the last known person to see Daniel Marsh alive. He was in good spirits, Farrow told investigators, talked about his kids, asked about my wife's hip surgery, said he had one more stretch to finish, then he was heading home. Nothing unusual, nothing that would make you think twice. Marsh's truck was found at 3:20 that afternoon, parked on the shoulder of Route 9 approximately 2 miles east of Woodford Hollow. A passing motorist named Gerald Thibault noticed the vehicle and stopped to check if the driver needed assistance. The truck was empty. The engine was off but still warm. The keys were in the ignition. Thibault waited 15 minutes, assuming Marsh had stepped into the woods briefly. When no one appeared, he drove to the general store and asked Farrow to call the sheriff. The investigation that followed uncovered details that transformed the case from a missing persons inquiry into something no one could adequately explain. Marsh's delivery manifest for December 26th listed 47 packages and 112 pieces of standard mail. When investigators inventoried the contents of his truck, they found 46 packages and all 112 pieces of mail, sorted and organized in Marsh's characteristic precise system. One package was missing. The manifest described it as a small cardboard box, approximately 6 inches by 4 inches by 3 inches, weighing less than 1 pound. The delivery address was 47 Hollow Road, Woodford, a rural route designation that should have been familiar to any postal worker covering Route 7. But 47 Hollow Road did not exist. County records showed that a house had stood at that location until October 19th, 1952, when it burned to the ground in an electrical fire. The property's owner, a widow named Constance Aldrich, perished in the blaze. The land had never been rebuilt upon. By 1987, the foundation had been swallowed by 35 years of forest growth, invisible from the road, marked on no contemporary map. The return address on the missing package was equally troubling. 12 Prospect Street, Bennington Daniel Marsh's own home address. His handwriting was on the label, according to his wife, though she had no knowledge of him preparing or mailing any such package. He never mentioned it, Dorothy Marsh told investigators. I asked him about it, and he just looked at me like he didn't know what I was talking about. That was 3 days before he disappeared. Postal records showed the package had entered the system on December 22nd, processed through the Bennington sorting facility on December 23rd, and been assigned to Marsh's route on December 24th. It had waited in the post office through Christmas Day, then been loaded onto his truck with the rest of the backlog on the morning of the 26th. No one could explain how a package addressed to a house that hadn't existed for 35 years had been accepted for delivery. No one could explain why Daniel Marsh or someone using his address had sent it. The search for Marsh covered an 8-mile radius around where his truck was found. Tracking dogs were brought in from the state police barracks in Rutland. Helicopters surveyed the forest canopy. Volunteer teams walked grid patterns through the underbrush. On the third day, a search team, led by Deputy Wayne Sutherland, discovered something approximately 400 yards from the road, in a small clearing that did not appear on any topographic map. It was a foundation crumbling stone walls, perhaps 3 feet high at their tallest point, arranged in a rectangle roughly 30 feet by 20 feet. A rusted iron bed frame lay in what would have been the northeast corner. Shattered glass glinted beneath a thin layer of snow. A brick chimney, partially collapsed, rose from the foundation's western edge. The site was consistent with records describing 47 Hollow Road before its destruction in 1952. But the records indicated the property was nearly a mile from this location. Either the county surveys were wrong, or the house had somehow moved. In the center of the foundation, searchers found a single item, a small cardboard box, opened, empty. The label was weathered, but legible. The delivery address read, 47 Hollow Road, Woodford. The return address read, 12 Prospect Street, Bennington. It was the missing package. Inside the box was nothing, no packing material, no contents, no indication of what it had originally held. The interior was clean, unmarked, and completely dry despite the snow that had fallen since Marsh's disappearance. Of Daniel Marsh himself, there was no sign. No footprints led to the foundation. No footprints led away. The clearing showed no evidence of human presence other than the empty box sitting precisely in the center of what had once been a widow's living room. Investigators interviewed Dorothy Marsh extensively in the weeks following her husband's disappearance. She provided a detail that hadn't seemed significant at the time, but took on new weight in retrospect. Approximately 3 weeks before Daniel vanished, he had begun asking questions about the history of Woodford Hollow. He visited the town clerk's office to review property records. He spent an evening at the Bennington Free Library researching newspaper archives from the early 1950s. He asked his wife if she had ever heard of a woman named Constance Aldrich. He said he'd been having dreams, Dorothy recalled. Not nightmares, exactly. He said there was a woman who kept asking him to bring her something she'd lost. He couldn't remember what it was when he woke up, but he said it felt important. He said it felt like a debt. Dorothy did not know Constance Aldrich. She had never heard the name before Daniel mentioned it. She had no explanation for why her husband might have felt indebted to a woman who had died 7 years before he was born. The Bennington Historical Society provided what little documentation existed about Aldrich. She had been 47 years old at the time of her death, the same age Daniel Marsh would have been in 1991, had he lived. She had no surviving relatives. Her personal effects had been destroyed in the fire. The only photograph that survived showed a woman with dark hair and a guarded expression, standing on the porch of a house that no longer existed. The cause of the fire was officially listed as faulty wiring, but a handwritten note in the fire marshal's report, never included in the official findings, read, "Origin point inconsistent with electrical patterns. No accelerant detected. Unable to determine cause." The house had burned from the inside out, starting in the living room, on an October night, 35 years before Daniel Marsh disappeared. The case of the Bennington Triangle driver was officially suspended in February 1988 due to lack of viable leads. Daniel Marsh was declared legally dead in 1994. His wife never remarried. His children, grown now, do not speak publicly about their father's disappearance. The foundation in the woods was surveyed and photographed after its discovery, then left undisturbed. No excavation was conducted. No further investigation of the site was authorized. The location was removed from subsequent topographic maps, though whether this was an oversight or a deliberate decision has never been determined. In 2003, a hiker exploring the area off-trail stumbled upon the ruins. He reported finding the stone walls largely unchanged, but noted something new: a small cairn of rocks stacked in the center of the foundation, approximately 2 feet high, arranged with obvious intention. When the hiker photographed the cairn and reviewed the images later, he noticed something he hadn't seen with his own eyes. Balanced on top of the cairn was a small cardboard box, different from the one recovered in 1987, newer, with a white mailing label clearly visible. He had not observed the box during his visit. It did not appear in any of his other photographs, only the 3 shots he had taken of the cairn itself. The hiker did not return to investigate. He submitted his photographs to the Bennington County Sheriff's Office. The file was acknowledged, but no follow-up was conducted. The delivery address on the box, as best it could be determined from digital enhancement, appeared to read 12 Prospect Street, Bennington. The return address was listed as 47 Hollow Road, Woodford, a house that burned down in 1952 at an address that doesn't exist, on a road that leads into the hollow where sound dies and compasses drift, and the mountain takes what it is owed. Daniel Marsh delivered mail for 11 years through territory the Abenaki knew to avoid. He knew every mile of his route. He knew every driveway, every dog, every name on every mailbox. But there was one address he couldn't stop looking for, one package he couldn't stop carrying, one debt he couldn't remember incurring. The Bennington Triangle kept taking people long after 1950. It simply became quieter about it. And somewhere in the hollow, in a foundation that moves through the forest like a wound that won't heal, a box waits to be delivered. Return to sender. Address unknown. The frequency had been dead for 40 years, and then it wasn't. Hardwick sits in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom, a region that earned its name not from any royal connection, but from the sense of isolation that pervades its hills and hollows. The town of 3,000 occupies a bend in the Lamoille River, surrounded by dairy farms that have operated for generations and forests that have never been fully surveyed. Route 15 runs through it like a lifeline, the main artery connecting the kingdom to the rest of the state. 2 lanes of cracked asphalt that wind between mountains too modest to name and valleys too deep to farm. The Northeast Kingdom has always attracted people who prefer solitude. Ham radio operators found it especially suitable: minimal electromagnetic interference, vast distances between neighbors, and long winter nights that demanded some form of connection to the world beyond. By the 1980s, the region had one of the highest concentrations of amateur radio operators per capita in New England. Victor Stanhope was one of them. Stanhope had been licensed since 1972, when he was 19 years old and newly returned from a tour in Vietnam. He built his first transmitter from salvaged military equipment and spent the next 4 decades refining his setup, upgrading antennas, expanding frequencies, logging contacts with operators on every continent. His workshop, A converted barn behind his farmhouse on Bridgman Hill Road contained equipment spanning 50 years of amateur radio history, much of it restored by his own hands. He was methodical. He was patient. He kept detailed logs of every transmission he sent and received, dates and times and frequencies and call signs, filled notebooks that lined the shelves of his workshop in chronological order. It was this precision that made his final logbook so disturbing. The first entry appeared on December 25, 2016. At 11:47 p.m., Stanhope recorded receiving a transmission on 5.195 megahertz, a frequency that had been decommissioned by the Federal Communications Commission in 1976 as part of a spectrum reallocation. No station had been authorized to broadcast on that frequency in 4 decades. Stanhope's own equipment shouldn't have been able to receive it without significant modification. His log entry was characteristically precise. 2,347 hours, 5.195 megahertzes, female voice, American English, no accent, detectable. Repeating coordinates: 44 degrees, 31 minutes, 12 seconds north, 72 degrees, 22 minutes, 48 seconds west. Signal strength weak but clear, no call sign, no identification. Transmission continues for approximately 4 minutes, then ceases. Attempted response on same frequency, no reply. The coordinates corresponded to an empty field approximately 3 miles south of Hardwick Center, just off Route 15. The field belonged to a family named Arsenault, who used it for hay cultivation in summer and left it fallow in winter. Stanhope drove to the location the following morning. What he found prompted a second entry in his log. The 26th of December 2016, 0815 hours. Visited coordinates from last night's transmission. Field accessible via unmarked farm road. Found tire tracks in snow. Single vehicle. Leading approximately 200 yards into field. Tracks terminate abruptly. No turnaround. No continuation. Snow beyond termination point, undisturbed. No vehicle present. No footprints. Photographed scene. Reported to Hardwick Police Department officer, took information, but expressed skepticism. The photographs Stanhope took showed exactly what his log described. Parallel tire tracks cutting through pristine snow, then stopping as if the vehicle had simply ceased to exist. On December 25, 2017, the transmission returned. Stanhope had prepared. He had set up a recording device connected to his receiver, calibrated specifically to the 5.195 megahertz frequency. He had informed 3 fellow ham operators in the area to monitor the same frequency at the same time. At 11:47 p.m., his equipment crackled to life. The recording, later analyzed by audio engineers at the University of Vermont, captured a woman's voice, repeating the same coordinates Stanhope had logged the previous year. The voice was calm, unhurried, with no emotional inflection, reading the numbers as if from a script, pausing at regular intervals, then beginning again. None of the 3 operators Stanhope had asked to monitor the frequency heard anything. Their equipment recorded only static during the relevant time window. The transmission, whatever its source, appeared to be reaching Stanhope's receiver alone. He drove to the field again on December 26th. The tire tracks were there fresh, identical in pattern to the previous year, terminating at the same point in the snow. He photographed them, measured them, and submitted a formal report to the Caledonia County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Linda Olette was assigned to investigate. Her report, filed on December 28th, concluded no evidence of criminal activity. No missing persons reports matching the described scenario. Recommend no further action pending additional information. Stanhope's logbook entry for that day contained a single additional sentence. The tracks are in exactly the same place. Not similar. Exactly the same. The third transmission arrived on December 25th, 2018. By then, Stanhope had become consumed by the mystery. His notebooks from that period show extensive research into the history of the Arsenault field, the origins of the 5.195 megahertz frequency, and any recorded disappearances in the Hardwick area. He discovered that the frequency had last been used by the Civil Air Patrol in the early 1970s for search and rescue coordination. It had been decommissioned after a reorganization of emergency communications, replaced by newer frequencies with better propagation characteristics. He also discovered that in December 1974, a woman named Genevieve Lacroix had disappeared while driving home to Hardwick from a Christmas party in Wolcott. Her car was found on Route 15, approximately half a mile from the Arsenault field. Engine running, driver's door open. No footprints led from the vehicle. No trace of her was ever found. The case file, which Stanhope obtained through a records request, contained a single anomalous detail. Lacroix had been a licensed ham radio operator. Her call sign was W1GVL. Her preferred frequency, according to her license application, was 5.195 MHz. The transmission on December 25, 2018, lasted 6 minutes and 43 seconds longer than the previous two. The voice was the same. The coordinates were the same. But at the 4-minute mark, after completing a cycle of the coordinate sequence, the voice added 3 additional words. Stanhope's log recorded them. Victor, please come. He had never broadcast his name on the decommissioned frequency. He had never received a reply to his attempts at contact. There was no way, by any conventional understanding of radio communication, that the source of the transmission could have known who was listening. On December 25, 2019, Victor Stanhope told his wife, Margaret, that he was going to the workshop to monitor the frequency. He left their farmhouse at approximately 11:30 p.m., wearing his winter coat and carrying a flashlight. Margaret fell asleep on the couch waiting for him. When she woke at 2:15 a.m. and checked the workshop, it was empty. His truck was gone from the driveway. The radio was still on, tuned to 5.195 MHz, receiving only static. His logbook lay open on the desk. The final entry, dated December 25, 2019, read 2,347 hours. Transmission received. Same coordinates. She said my name again. Said she's been waiting. Said the snow remembers. Going to the field. If I'm not back by morning, the frequency is real. Tell them the frequency is real. Victor Stanhope's truck was found the following afternoon in the Arsenault field, approximately 200 yards from Route 15. The engine was cold. The driver's door was open. The keys were in the ignition. Tire tracks led from the farm road to the truck's position. Beyond it, the snow was undisturbed. There were no footprints. The investigation into Stanhope's disappearance was led by Detective Richard Fournier of the Caledonia County Sheriff's Office. Fournier reviewed Stanhope's logbooks, his recordings, and his research. He interviewed Margaret Stanhope, the Arsenault family, and the ham radio operators who had attempted to monitor the frequency in 2017. His report, filed in February 2020, reached no firm conclusions. The physical evidence is consistent with a missing persons case, Fournier wrote. The circumstances are not consistent with any recognizable pattern. The subject was experienced, mentally competent, and familiar with the terrain. There is no indication of foul play, no indication of self-harm, and no indication of where the subject may have gone after exiting his vehicle. The report made no mention of the radio transmissions, the coordinates, or Genevieve Lacroix. When asked about this omission in a later interview, Fournier was uncharacteristically hesitant. There are things you put in reports, he said, and things you leave out because no one would believe them anyway. Stanhope was a careful man. He documented everything. Either he was experiencing some kind of delusion that lasted 3 years and produced physical evidence, the tire tracks, the recordings, or something was actually transmitting on a frequency that doesn't exist anymore. He paused. I don't know which explanation is worse. Margaret Stanhope has not entered her husband's workshop since his disappearance. The building remains as he left it, equipment powered down, logbooks on their shelves, the receiver still tuned to 5.195 MHz. She has, however, spoken to neighbors who pass by the property. At least 4 residents of Bridgman Hill Road have reported hearing sounds from the workshop on Christmas night, a faint crackling, like static, audible only if you stop and listen. One neighbor, a retired electrician named Dale Bouchard, claims he heard a voice mixed with the static in 2021. "It was a woman," he said. "She was reading numbers. I couldn't make out what they were. The signal was too weak. But she sounded patient, like she had all the time in the world." Bouchard checked his watch when he heard the voice. It was 11:47 p.m. The Arsenault field remains undeveloped. The family has declined offers to purchase the land, though they no longer cultivate it. When asked why, Jerome Arsenault, the patriarch of the family, offered only a brief response. "Some fields shouldn't be crossed," he said. "My grandfather knew that. His father knew it before him. Whatever's in that snow, it's been there longer than us, and it's patient." The frequency 5.195 MHz remains officially decommissioned. No station is authorized to broadcast on it. No transmission should be possible. But every Christmas, at 11:47 p.m., a woman's voice reads coordinates into the darkness. She reads them calmly, precisely, without urgency. She reads them for anyone who might be listening and perhaps for the one who finally answered. Victor Stanhope went to the field because the frequency was real. The snow remembered, and somewhere between the static, a voice is still waiting for the next person to hear her call. The shadows were pointing the wrong way, and no one could explain what cast them. Chimney Point occupies the narrowest crossing of Lake Champlain, where Vermont reaches toward New York across a channel that freezes solid in harsh winters. The point takes its name from the stone chimneys that once marked the site of a French colonial settlement, established in 1731 and abandoned within a decade. The chimneys stood alone for nearly 2 centuries, monuments to something that failed before they too crumbled into the lake. The toll house came later, a small wooden structure built in 1842 to collect passage fees from travelers using the ferry that connected Chimney Point to Crown Point on the New York side. The ferry operated until 1929, when a bridge was constructed 2 miles to the north. The toll house was abandoned, left to weather and rot, until only its foundation and a single stone wall remained. By 1963, the ruins had become a minor landmark, a place where tourists sometimes stopped to photograph the lake or examine the weathered stonework. A historical marker installed by the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation in 1958 provided a brief account of the site's history. It made no mention of the stories that locals had been telling for generations. The Abenaki had a name for the point, Nebezonbik, the place where the water watches. French missionaries recorded that the indigenous peoples would not camp there, would not fish from its shores, would not cross the ice that formed in front of it. When asked why, they spoke of children who had walked onto the frozen lake in a winter before memory and never returned. They spoke of shadows that moved without bodies, of voices that called from the ice when no one was there. The French settlement failed for reasons that were never adequately documented. Official records cite insurmountable difficulties and conditions unsuitable for habitation. A single surviving letter from a colonist to his family in Quebec, dated March 1737, contains a passage that historians have struggled to interpret. "The children hear singing from the lake at night. We have forbidden them from approaching the shore. But the singing continues, and they no longer sleep." The settlement was abandoned the following spring. The colonists left everything behind. The Harmon family arrived at Chimney Point at approximately 10:15 on the morning of December 25, 1963. Walter Harmon, 38, was a mechanical engineer from Montpelier. His wife, Ruth, was 35, a school teacher. Their children, David, 9, and Catherine, 6, had been promised a special Christmas outing to see the frozen lake and the historic ruins that Walter remembered visiting as a boy. The morning was overcast, temperatures hovering around 20 degrees, with a light wind from the northwest. Lake Champlain was frozen solid from shore to shore, conditions that occurred only in the coldest winters and had become increasingly rare even by the 1960s. According to Ruth Harmon's later testimony, the family parked near the historical marker and walked the short path to the toll house ruins. Walter carried a Kodak Brownie camera, intending to photograph the children against the backdrop of the frozen lake. The outing was meant to last no more than 30 minutes before they continued to Ruth's sister's house in Burlington for Christmas dinner. The family took several photographs at the ruins. Ruth described the scene as perfectly ordinary, the children laughing, throwing snowballs, examining the old stonework with the curiosity typical of their ages. David asked questions about who had lived there and why they left. Catherine wanted to walk out onto the ice. "We told her no," Ruth said. "The ice looked solid, but you never knew." Walter was firm about it. She pouted for a minute, then forgot about it. At approximately 10:40, Walter suggested one final photograph. The whole family posed in front of the remaining stone wall, with the lake visible in the background. He set up the camera on a fence post, using the self-timer function, and joined his wife and children in the frame. The camera clicked. Walter retrieved it. The family began walking back to their car. They made it approximately 50 yards before Ruth realized the children were no longer behind them. The search began immediately. Walter ran back to the ruins, while Ruth checked the car and the surrounding roadside. Neither child was at either location. Walter called their names. He searched the toll house foundation, the shoreline, the tree line that bordered the site to the south. There was no response. There was no sign of them. By 11:15, Walter had flagged down a passing motorist and asked him to contact the state police. By noon, a formal search was underway, coordinated by Trooper Eugene Pollard out of the Vergennes barracks. The search covered the ruins, the shoreline, and a 1-mile radius of surrounding woodland. Dogs were brought in from the Addison County Sheriff's Office. The frozen surface of the lake was examined for any sign of a break or disturbance that might indicate the children had fallen through. Nothing was found. The ice was intact, solid, unmarked, showing no footprints or fractures. The snow around the ruins preserved clear tracks from the Harmon family's visit, but all tracks led only to and from the parking area. There were no prints leading toward the lake. There were no prints leading into the woods. There were no prints leading anywhere the children might have gone. It was like they'd been erased. Trooper Pollard wrote in his initial report, "The tracks stopped where the family had been standing for the photograph. Beyond that point, there was nothing." At 2:30 that afternoon, a searcher named Donald Brosseau discovered the camera still hanging from the fence post where Walter had placed it for the timed photograph. In the chaos of the search, no one had thought to retrieve it. The roll of film inside contained 13 exposed frames. The film was developed the following day at a laboratory in Burlington. Frames 1 through 12 showed what the Harmons remembered: the family posing, the children playing, Walter and Ruth standing arm in arm before the stone wall. The images were ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of Christmas photographs that filled albums across America. Frame 13 was different. The 13th photograph showed the road behind the toll house ruins the opposite direction from where the camera had been pointed for all previous shots. The image was slightly overexposed, as if taken in brighter light than the overcast conditions would have allowed. The road surface was visible, the tree line in the distance, a portion of the stone wall at the frame's edge. And in the foreground, stretching across the snow-covered ground, were two shadows. They were small, child-sized, and elongated in the manner of late-afternoon shadows when the sun sits low on the horizon. But the photograph's metadata, confirmed by the development laboratory, indicated it had been taken at approximately 10:42 a.m. The sun, even on a clear day, would have been nearly overhead, and the sky that morning had been clouded, the sun invisible behind a uniform gray ceiling that cast no distinct shadows at all. The shadows in the photograph stretched toward the lake, parallel to each other, roughly 15 feet long. They had no apparent source. Nothing in the frame could have cast them. They simply existed, reaching across the snow like dark fingers pointing toward the frozen water. Ruth Harmon could not explain the photograph. She had not taken it. Walter had not taken it. The camera's self-timer had been used only once, for the family portrait, and that image was frame 12. Frame 13 should not have existed. "I don't know who took it," Ruth told investigators. "I don't know what it shows. But those shadows, they're the size of my children. And they're pointing toward the place Catherine wanted to go." The search for David and Catherine Harmon continued through December and into January 1964. Dive teams examined the lake bed near the point after the spring thaw, finding nothing. Private investigators hired by the family pursued leads that went nowhere. Psychics offered visions that proved false. The case remained open, officially unsolved, for the next 6 decades. Walter Harmon died in 1989, never having learned what happened to his children. Ruth lived until 2004, spending her final years in a nursing home in Burlington. Staff members reported that she would sometimes stare out the window toward the lake and whisper names that no one recognized. The toll house ruins still stand at Chimney Point, though little remains beyond the foundation stones and scattered fragments of the wall. The historical marker was replaced in 1992 with an updated version that makes no reference to the Harmon family or the events of 1963. But locals remember. Fishermen who work the lake in winter report that the ice near Chimney Point behaves strangely, freezing faster than the surrounding water, holding firm even when other sections show signs of weakness. Some refuse to fish there at all. They speak of sounds that carry across the frozen surface on still nights. Children's laughter, faint and distant, coming from somewhere out on the ice. In 2011, a historian researching colonial-era disappearances discovered a partial census from the French settlement at Chimney Point. Among the names listed were 2 children, a boy of 9 and a girl of 6, recorded as lost to the lake in the winter of 1736. Their names were David and Catherine. The census provided no surnames. The document offered no explanation for their loss. It simply recorded their existence and their absence. 2 children who walked toward the frozen water nearly 230 years before 2 others would vanish from the same place, at the same ages. On a Christmas morning, when the sun hid behind clouds and cast no shadows, the camera that recorded frame 13 was donated to the Vermont Historical Society in 1991. It remains in their archive, cataloged but rarely displayed. The photograph itself has been examined by forensic analysts, photography experts, and specialists in optical phenomena. None have offered a satisfactory explanation for what it depicts. The shadows remain in the frame, preserved in silver halide, pointing toward a lake that has taken children before and will take them again. They stretch across the snow like a path or a promise, leading toward the ice where voices still call on winter nights and the water watches from beneath its frozen skin. Some photographs capture a moment, some capture a memory, and some, perhaps, capture something that hasn't finished happening, a story that repeats across centuries. 2 children walking toward a voice that only they can hear, disappearing into a place that exists in the space between the click of a shutter and the development of film. The Harmon family stopped at Chimney Point to take a photograph on Christmas morning. 12 frames showed a family. The 13th showed what followed. David and Catherine Harmon walked toward the lake, and somewhere in the shadows, they're still walking. The road was named for someone who never existed, and that was only the first thing wrong with it. Marshfield occupies a quiet corner of Washington County, Vermont, a township of approximately 1,500 people, spread across rolling hills and river valleys, where the Winooski's North Branch carves through granite and clay on its way to the lowlands. The town was chartered in 1782, settled by families from Connecticut and Massachusetts, who found the terrain suitable for dairy farming and the isolation suitable for their temperaments. Most of Marshfield's roads bear names that trace directly to the families who built them, or the landmarks they connected. Hollister Hill, named for the Hollister farm that operated there until 1947. Reservoir Road, which leads to the town's water supply. School Street, self-explanatory. The origins are documented in town records, church registries, and the memories of families who have lived here for generations. Hartwell Road is different. The road first appears in municipal records in 1891, when the town select board approved funds for maintenance and improvement of Hartwell Road, eastern section, from the Plainfield line to its terminus. No record exists of the road's construction. No survey documents its original route. No deed or land transfer mentions a family named Hartwell in connection with the property it crosses. The Vermont Historical Society has no record of anyone named Hartwell living in Washington County at any point in the 19th century. The name appears in no census data, no tax rolls, no birth or death certificates. A genealogical search conducted in 2009 found no Hartwell family anywhere in New England prior to 1920, and those families had no connection to Vermont whatsoever. The road simply exists, as if it always had, bearing a name that belongs to no one. It runs for approximately 3.5 miles from the Plainfield town line, winding through forest and farmland before narrowing to a single lane in its final mile. The pavement ends at the 2-mile mark. Beyond that, the road becomes packed dirt and gravel, maintained sporadically by the town, used primarily by hunters in autumn, and avoided by most residents year-round. The final mile of Hartwell Road ends at a wall of trees, old-growth maple and birch, dense undergrowth. No clearing, no structure, no indication that anything was ever built there. The road simply stops, as if whoever surveyed it was aiming for something that was never completed or something that was erased so thoroughly that not even a foundation remains. Patricia Oakes was 51 years old on the night she disappeared. She worked as a traveling nurse for a home healthcare agency based in Montpelier, providing care to elderly and homebound patients throughout central Vermont. Her route on December 24, 2002, included 3 stops: a diabetic patient in Plainfield, a post-surgical case in Cabot, and a final check-in at a hospice residence in Hardwick. She completed her visits without incident and began her drive home to Barr at approximately 8:45 p.m. The weather that evening was clear and cold, temperatures in the single digits. Roads dry, visibility excellent. Patricia's route home should have taken her south on Route 2, a straightforward 40-minute drive she had made hundreds of times. She never arrived. At 9:17 p.m., Patricia called her daughter, Melissa, from her cell phone. Melissa was 23 at the time, living in an apartment in Burlington, expecting her mother to call when she got home safely, as she always did after late shifts. The conversation lasted approximately 4 minutes. Melissa later recounted it in detail to investigators. She said she'd gotten turned around somewhere near Marshfield, Melissa recalled. She wasn't worried, she said. She'd just taken a wrong turn and ended up on some back road. She was looking for a place to turn around or ask for directions. Patricia described her surroundings: a narrow dirt road, trees close on both sides, no houses visible. She mentioned that her GPS wasn't working properly. The screen showed her location as a blank space, as if the road she was on didn't exist in the system's database. Then her tone changed. She said she could see a farmhouse ahead, Melissa said. She sounded relieved. She said it was beautiful old, with white clapboard siding and candles in every window. She said it looked like a Christmas card. She said she was going to stop and ask for directions. Melissa heard her mother's car slow down. She heard the crunch of tires on gravel. She heard the engine stop and the car door open. Then she heard her mother say, "Oh, it's so much closer than I thought." The line went dead. Melissa tried calling back immediately. The calls went straight to voicemail. She tried for 20 minutes before contacting the Washington County Sheriff's Office. The search began at 11 p.m. Deputies traced Patricia's last known location using cell tower data, which indicated she had been somewhere in the northeastern section of Marshfield when she made the call. The signal was imprecise. Cell coverage in that area was poor, but it narrowed the search to a handful of roads. At 1:30 a.m. on Christmas morning, Deputy Francis Robitaille discovered Patricia's Honda Accord parked at the end of Hartwell Road. The car was positioned as if it had been carefully parked rather than abandoned, centered in the narrow lane, engine off, headlights off, driver's door closed but unlocked. Patricia's purse was on the passenger seat. Her phone was on the dashboard, battery dead. Her keys were in the ignition. There was no farmhouse. Robitaille walked the area with his flashlight, searching for any structure that might match what Patricia had described. He found only trees, dense, old, showing no signs of clearing or construction. The forest at the end of Hartwell Road was undisturbed, the undergrowth thick, the ground covered in a layer of snow that showed no footprints leading away from the vehicle. "I've lived in Marshfield my whole life," Robitaille said in his report. "There's never been a house at the end of that road. Not a farmhouse, not a cabin, nothing. Whatever she saw, it wasn't there when I arrived, and there's no way a building could have been removed in 4 hours without leaving some trace." The search expanded at dawn. Tracking dogs were brought in, but they circled the vehicle without picking up a scent trail. Ground teams searched the surrounding forest for a quarter-mile radius, finding nothing, no clothing, no footprints, no evidence that Patricia Oakes had ever left her car. She was gone. The investigation that followed raised questions that no one could answer. Cell phone records confirmed that Patricia had made the call to her daughter from somewhere within a half-mile radius of where her car was found. The conversation's duration and content were consistent with Melissa's account, but the technical data contained an anomaly that investigators couldn't explain. During the call, Patricia's phone had briefly connected to a cell tower that shouldn't have existed. The tower in question, designated VT4000, 471 inches carrier records, was listed as having been decommissioned in 1998. Its physical structure had been dismantled in 2001. Yet Patricia's phone had registered a signal from that tower for approximately 45 seconds during her final call between 9:18 and 9:19 p.m. When investigators contacted the cellular provider for clarification, they were told that the record was likely a database error and that the tower could not have been transmitting. No further explanation was offered. The anomaly was noted in the case file but not pursued. Melissa Oakes pressed investigators about the farmhouse her mother had described. She wanted to know if any structure matching that description had ever existed at the end of Hartwell Road or anywhere nearby. The answer was complicated. Town records from 1891, the same year Hartwell Road first appeared in municipal documents, mentioned a dwelling house associated with the road's eastern terminus. No owner was listed. No description was provided. The reference appeared in a single line item regarding road maintenance assessments and was never mentioned again. A survey conducted in 1923 as part of a county-wide mapping project noted that Hartwell Road terminates at former homestead site, structure no longer extant. The survey included no further details. No photographs were taken. No foundation measurements were recorded. Whatever had stood at the end of Hartwell Road, if anything ever had, was gone by 1923, erased so completely that only the faintest documentary traces remained. Patricia Oakes was declared legally dead in 2009, 7 years after her disappearance. Her case remains officially open but inactive, classified as a missing person with no viable leads. Melissa Oakes has never stopped searching. She has visited Hartwell Road dozens of times over the past 2 decades, always hoping to find something the investigators missed. She has interviewed longtime Marshfield residents, researched the road's history, and submitted Freedom of Information requests to every agency that might have relevant records. What she has found is mostly absence gaps, where information should be, silences, where answers should exist. But she has also found patterns. In 1957, a hunter named George Pelletier reported seeing lights at the end of Hartwell Road on Christmas Eve, like candles in windows. But there's no windows out there. He mentioned it to friends at a tavern in Plainfield. They laughed it off. He never reported it officially. In 1974, a family driving through Marshfield on Christmas Eve stopped to ask directions at a gas station. The father mentioned they'd tried to turn around on that road with the old farmhouse at the end, but couldn't find a driveway. The attendant didn't know what road he meant. The family continued on their way and was never identified. In 1988, a letter to the editor in the Hardwick Gazette asked if anyone knew the history of the Hartwell place, a reference to a house that the letter writer claimed to have seen while walking the road in winter. No responses were published. The letter writer's name was illegible, and no follow-up inquiry was ever made. The farmhouse appears and disappears, visible to some and invisible to others, present on Christmas Eve and absent on Christmas morning. Those who see it describe it the same way: white clapboard, candles in every window, beautiful and welcoming, and somehow closer than it should be. Hartwell Road remains on the Marshfield town map, though it receives little traffic. The final unpaved mile is poorly maintained, rutted and overgrown, passable only in dry conditions or when the ground is frozen solid. A small sign at the 2-mile mark warns that the road is not a through route and dead ends ahead. The trees at the terminus have grown thicker since 2002. The forest has crept closer to where Patricia's car was found, as if reclaiming territory that was never meant to be cleared. In winter, when the leaves are gone and the snow covers the ground, the road looks much as it must have looked a century ago, narrow, shadowed, leading towards something that isn't there. Last December, a hiker exploring the area reported finding something unusual, approximately 50 yards into the tree line beyond the road's end. It was a stone, roughly rectangular, partially buried in the frozen ground. The exposed surface was worn smooth, but faint markings were still visible: letters, perhaps, or numbers, too weathered to read. The hiker photographed the stone and posted the image online, asking if anyone could identify its purpose. Several respondents suggested it might be a boundary marker or a foundation remnant. One commenter, posting anonymously, offered a different interpretation. "That's a threshold stone," the comment read. "They used to put them at the entrance to a house. It marks where the outside ends and the inside begins." The hiker returned to the location a week later to investigate further. The stone was gone. The ground where it had been was undisturbed, covered in fresh snow, showing no sign that anything had ever been buried there. Hartwell Road leads to a house that doesn't exist, named for a family that never lived. On Christmas Eve, candles burn in windows that no one can find. And somewhere in the space between the last mile and the forest that swallowed it, a woman stopped to ask for directions and walked through a door that opens only for those it chooses to invite. Patricia Oakes saw the farmhouse. She said it was beautiful. She said it was so much closer than she thought. The photograph was taken from beneath the ice, and that was the part that ended the investigation. Lake Willoughby lies in Vermont's northeast kingdom like a wound that never closed, a glacial fjord carved between Mount Hor and Mount Pisgah, its waters reaching depths of over 300 feet in places. The lake is 5 miles long, but barely a mile wide, compressed between the mountains that rise nearly 1,000 feet on either side. On clear days, the water appears almost black, so deep that light cannot reach the bottom. On overcast days, it reflects the sky like polished obsidian, a mirror that shows only what hangs above it. The Abenaki called it Menakik, the deep place, and avoided its shores except for specific rituals that were never recorded by European observers. French explorers who passed through in the 1740s noted that their indigenous guides would not camp within sight of the water and would not speak of why. One account, preserved in the archives of the Quebec Seminary, describes a guide who refused to continue past the lake's northern shore, saying only that the water there does not forget and it does not forgive. Route 5A traces the lake's western edge, a narrow 2-lane road that offers some of the most dramatic scenery in New England. Scenic overlooks dot the route, providing photographers and tourists with unobstructed views of the water and the mountains that embrace it. The most popular overlook sits approximately 2/3 of the way down the lake's length, where Mount Pisgah's cliffs rise directly from the water's edge, and the depth drops to over 280 feet within yards of the shore. It was there, on the evening of December 23, 2005, that Marcus Weber stopped to take photographs. Weber was 37 years old, a commercial photographer based in Burlington who specialized in landscape and nature work. His images had appeared in Vermont Life magazine, in tourism brochures, and in a coffee table book about New England winters that had sold modestly but earned critical praise. He was known among colleagues for his patience and his technical precision, the kind of photographer who would wait hours for the right light rather than settle for an adequate shot. He had driven to Lake Willoughby specifically to photograph the frozen surface at dusk, when the fading light would create what he called the blue hour. That brief window when the sky darkens to deep azure and the ice takes on an otherworldly luminescence. His wife, Sandra, expected him home by 9 p.m. He had made the drive many times before. At 4:17 p.m., Weber sent a text message to Sandra. At Willoughby. Ice looks perfect. Light should be good in about an hour. Home by 9. At 5:42 p.m., he sent a second message, getting some incredible shots. Staying a bit longer, might be closer to 10. At 6:23 p.m., he sent a final message. Something strange on the ice. Going to check it out. Call you soon. He never called. He never came home. Sandra Weber contacted the Vermont State Police at 11:15 p.m. after her husband failed to answer repeated calls and texts. A patrol unit was dispatched to Route 5A. Deputy Elaine Marchetti arrived at the scenic overlook at 12:05 a.m. on December 24th. She found Weber's Subaru Outback parked in the gravel lot, unlocked, with his wallet and cell phone on the driver's seat. His camera bag was in the back, containing lenses, filters, and memory cards, but no camera body. His tripod stood at the edge of the overlook, legs extended, mounting plate empty, positioned to face the frozen lake. The ice itself was undisturbed. Marchetti walked to the shoreline and examined the surface with her flashlight. There were no footprints on the ice, no cracks, no dark patches that might indicate someone had fallen through. The snow that dusted the frozen surface was pristine, untouched by human passage. If he went out on the ice, he didn't leave any sign of it, Marchetti wrote in her report, and the ice was solid 6 inches thick at minimum, based on the cold snap we'd had that week. If he'd fallen through, there would have been evidence. There wasn't. The search expanded at dawn. Rangers from the Vermont Department of Forests, Parks and Recreation joined state police in covering the overlook, the shoreline, and the hiking trails that climbed Mount Pisgah and Mount Hor. Dive teams were put on standby, though the depth of the lake and the ice cover made immediate deployment impractical. Marcus Weber was not found. His camera was not found. But on December 25th, something else was discovered. Sandra Weber had access to her husband's cloud storage account, where he automatically backed up photographs from his camera via a wireless connection. On Christmas morning, checking the account in hope of finding some clue to his whereabouts, she found a new image. The photograph had been uploaded at 9:27 p.m. on December 23rd, 3 hours and 4 minutes after Marcus's last text message. The file metadata indicated it had been taken with his camera, a Canon EOS 5D Mark II. The GPS coordinates embedded in the file matched the scenic overlook on Route 5A, but the image itself made no sense. The photograph showed the underside of an ice sheet, a view that could only have been captured from beneath the frozen surface, looking up. Light filtered through the ice in fractured rays, illuminating crystalline structures and trapped air bubbles. The quality was extraordinary, the kind of sharp clarity that Marcus was known for achieving. In the center of the frame, directly above the camera's position, was a silhouette. The shape was unmistakably human, a figure standing on top of the ice, visible through the translucent surface. The proportions suggested an adult, though the distortion of the ice made precise identification impossible. The figure appeared to be looking down, as if staring directly at the camera, as if staring at whoever or whatever was beneath it. Sandra provided the photograph to investigators, Their attempts to explain it were unsuccessful. The technical analysis of the image raised more questions than it answered. The photograph was authentic, not manipulated, not composited, not altered in any detectable way. The camera settings were consistent with low-light underwater photography. High ISO, wide aperture, slow shutter speed. The file had not been edited on any computer. It had transferred directly from camera to cloud. But the circumstances of its creation were impossible. Lake Willoughby's ice cover on December 23rd was approximately 6 to 8 inches thick, solid enough to walk on, but far too thick to photograph through with any clarity. Even if Marcus had somehow cut a hole in the ice and submerged his camera, the water temperature was approximately 33 degrees Fahrenheit. His camera was not rated for underwater use. Without specialized housing, it would have been destroyed within seconds of submersion. More problematic was the depth. Based on the light patterns in the photograph, optical analysts estimated the camera had been positioned between 15 and 20 feet below the ice surface. At that depth, in water that dark, no ambient light would have been visible. Yet the image showed clear illumination, soft, diffuse, coming from no identifiable source. "There's no natural explanation for this photograph," said Dr. Eleanor Martindale, a forensic imaging specialist who examined the file at the request of Marcus's family. "The camera couldn't have survived underwater. The depth would have crushed the housing even if it had one, and the lighting is physically inconsistent with the conditions. It's as if the photograph was taken in a place that doesn't exist, or in conditions that shouldn't be possible." When asked what she believed had happened, Martindale declined to speculate. "I analyze evidence," she said. "I don't interpret the impossible." The investigation into Marcus Weber's disappearance continued through the winter of 2005 and into the spring of 2006. When the ice melted, dive teams searched the waters near the overlook, covering an area of approximately 3 acres and reaching depths of up to 150 feet. They found nothing. No body, no camera, no equipment, no clothing, nothing that belonged to Marcus Weber or indicated his presence in the lake. What they did find, approximately 80 feet down and 200 yards from the overlook, was something else entirely. It was a tripod. Not Marcus's tripod that had been recovered from the overlook on December 24th. This tripod was older, its metal corroded, its adjustable legs frozen in a fully extended position. The mounting plate was empty. It sat upright on the lake bed, legs planted in the silt, positioned as if someone had set it up and walked away. The tripod was identified as a model manufactured by the Fulmer Grayflex Corporation, discontinued in 1963. There were no engravings, no serial numbers, no way to determine its owner. When divers returned to photograph and recover the tripod the following day, it was gone. The silt where it had stood was undisturbed. There were no marks suggesting it had been moved, no tracks, no indication that anything had ever been there. The divers searched for 3 hours. They found nothing but darkness and cold and water that held its secrets close. Lake Willoughby has a history that extends beyond the Weber case, though officials have never formally acknowledged a pattern. In 1931, a honeymooning couple from Boston disappeared while photographing the lake from the northern shore. Their car was found at the overlook, their camera missing. No bodies were ever recovered. In 1958, a documentary filmmaker working on a project about Vermont's natural landscapes vanished after telling colleagues he had captured something extraordinary on film. His equipment was found at the scenic overlook on Route 5A. The film in his camera was blank, not unexposed, but erased, as if it had been deliberately wiped clean. In 1984, a tourist from Montreal stopped to take photographs of the frozen lake. His wife, waiting in the car, reported that he walked toward the shoreline and seemed to see something on the ice before disappearing from view. He was never found. His camera was recovered 3 days later, floating in a spring-fed stream half a mile from the lake. The memory card contained a single image, a blur of white and blue that analysts could not identify. The cases were never connected. The investigations were conducted by different agencies, in different decades, with different protocols. But the pattern is there for anyone who looks. Photographers drawn to the lake, compelled to capture something they glimpse in the ice, or the water, or the space between, vanishing without trace, except for impossible images that suggest they found what they were looking for. Sandra Weber visits Lake Willoughby every December 23rd. She parks at the scenic overlook, walks to the shoreline, and stands for a time looking out at the frozen surface. She doesn't take photographs. She doesn't speak. She simply watches, as if waiting for something to emerge from the deep. In 2018, she gave a brief interview to a journalist researching unexplained disappearances in the Northeast Kingdom. "I used to think he fell through the ice," she said. "I used to hope they'd find his body so I could have closure. But then I saw that photograph, the one he took from under the ice. And I realized that whatever happened to Marcus, it wasn't an accident. He went somewhere. He saw something. And he tried to show us." She paused, looking at the water. "The silhouette in the photograph, the figure standing on the ice, I've looked at it 1,000 times. I know my husband's shape, the way he stood, the slope of his shoulders. That silhouette isn't him. It's someone else, someone waiting for him." The photograph remains in Marcus Weber's cloud storage, accessible to his family and to investigators who continue to study it. The figure on the ice has never been identified. The angle from which it was taken has never been explained. Lake Willoughby keeps its depth and its darkness, and whatever waits in the space between surface and bottom. The water does not forget. The water does not forgive. And somewhere beneath the ice, a camera may still be recording, patient, cold, capturing images of a world that looks up at ours and waits for the next photographer to look back. The car arrives every Christmas, and no one has ever seen it leave. Exit 17 on Interstate 91 serves the town of Barnett, Vermont, a community of fewer than 2,000 people spread across the hills that rise from the Connecticut River Valley. The exit itself is unremarkable, a simple diamond interchange connecting the interstate to Route 5, with a small rest area on the northbound side that offers restrooms, vending machines, and a handful of parking spaces for travelers who need to stop. The rest area was constructed in 1974 as part of a federal highway improvement project. It sits on a slight rise above the roadway, shielded from traffic noise by a stand of white pines that have grown tall and dense in the decades since planting. The facility operates year-round, staffed by maintenance workers who rotate through on 8-hour shifts to keep the restrooms clean and the lot plowed during winter months. It is, by all accounts, one of the least notable rest stops in Vermont, too small for commercial trucks, too far from major cities to attract significant tourist traffic, too ordinary to warrant attention from anyone except those who need a moment's pause on their journey. And yet, the first documented report of unusual activity at Exit 17 came from a maintenance worker named Dolores Quintal in January 2010. Quintal had worked the overnight shift on Christmas Eve, arriving at 10 p.m. and remaining until 6 a.m. on Christmas morning. Her incident report, filed with the Vermont Agency of Transportation, described an event that would repeat with minor variations every year thereafter. At approximately 2:15 a.m., a vehicle entered the lot and parked in the farthest space from the building, Quintal wrote. Gray sedan, older model, couldn't identify the make. Headlights remained on. I assumed the driver was resting and did not approach. At approximately 5:45 a.m., I noticed the vehicle was no longer present. I walked to the space where it had been parked. There were tire tracks in the snow leading into the space, but none leading out. Quintal noted that she had not seen or heard the vehicle depart. She had been inside the maintenance building for most of her shift, but had clear sight lines to the parking lot. The sedan, she wrote, was there, and then it wasn't. She filed the report as a routine anomaly. No follow-up was conducted. The following Christmas, a different maintenance worker, Raymond Colombe, reported an identical experience. Gray sedan, farthest space. Headlights on from approximately 2:30 a.m. until sometime before dawn. Tire tracks leading in but not out. No driver observed, no departure witnessed. Coulombe's report added a detail that Quintals had not mentioned. The headlights did not dim during the night. Standard car battery would have drained after several hours. These stayed bright, steady, like they were plugged into something. In 2012, 2013, and 2014, the pattern continued. Different workers filed separate reports, each describing the same phenomenon with variations only in precise timing. The sedan arrived between 2 and 3 a. It parked in the same space. Its headlights burned until dawn. It vanished without leaving tracks. By 2015, the reports had accumulated enough that a supervisor named Gerald Thibault requested a formal review. The Agency of Transportation declined to investigate, classifying the incidents as unverified observations that did not warrant allocation of resources. Thibault, unconvinced, began his own informal inquiry. He interviewed current and former rest stop employees, reviewed maintenance logs, and searched historical records for any incidents that might explain the recurring phenomenon. What he found was a case file from 1988. On December 25, 1988, a man named Howard Prescott stopped at the Exit 17 rest area at approximately 1:45 a.m. Prescott was 53 years old, an insurance adjuster from Street Johnsbury, driving home from his sister's house in White River Junction after a Christmas Eve gathering. His wife, Judith, had stayed behind to help with cleanup and planned to return the following day. Howard had left early, citing fatigue and a preference for sleeping in his own bed. He called Judith from a payphone at the rest area at 1:52 a.m., the last confirmed communication anyone had with him. According to Judith's statement to police, the call was brief and unremarkable. He said he'd stopped to use the restroom and stretch his legs, she recalled. He sounded tired but fine. He said he'd be home in about 45 minutes. I told him to drive safe. That was it. Howard Prescott never arrived home. His car, a 1983 Chevrolet Caprice, gray, was found at the rest area the following morning, parked in the farthest space from the building. The engine was off. The headlights were off. The driver's door was unlocked. His wallet was in the glove box, his keys on the floor beneath the driver's seat, as if they had fallen from his hand. There was no sign of Howard Prescott. Search teams covered the rest area, the surrounding woods, and the highway shoulders for 3 miles in each direction. Tracking dogs picked up his scent at the car but lost it within 20 feet, as if he had simply stopped existing at that point. No body was ever found. No evidence of foul play was ever discovered. The case remained open for 7 years before Howard Prescott was declared legally dead in 1995. His file was archived, his disappearance unexplained. His car eventually sold at auction after Judith could no longer bear to look at it. The buyer was never identified in surviving records. The vehicle's subsequent history is unknown. In December 2016, a Vermont state trooper named Alice Bergeron was conducting a routine patrol of the Exit 17 rest area when she observed a gray sedan parked in the farthest space from the building. The time was approximately 2:40 a.m. Bergeron approached the vehicle to conduct a welfare check. The headlights were on, bright and steady. The engine appeared to be running. She could see exhaust vapor in the cold air, but she heard no sound. The windows were dark, impossible to see through despite the illumination from the headlights. She knocked on the driver's window. There was no response. She tried the door handle. It was locked. She returned to her patrol car to run the license plates. The results came back within 30 seconds. The vehicle was registered to Howard Prescott of Street Johnsbury, Vermont. Registration status: expired December 1988. Owner status: deceased. Bergeron called for backup. When she turned back toward the sedan, it was gone. The parking space was empty. The headlights that had been burning seconds before were nowhere to be seen. There was no sound of an engine, no sight of taillights on the highway, no indication that a vehicle had ever been there except for the tire tracks and the snow tracks that led into the space and stopped. Her backup arrived 11 minutes later. They found Bergeron standing at the edge of the empty parking space, flashlight in hand, staring at tracks that went nowhere. "I've been a trooper for 14 years, she told the investigating officer. "I've seen accidents, crimes, things that don't make sense. But I've never seen a car disappear. It didn't drive away. It didn't roll anywhere. It was there, and then it wasn't. Like someone just switched it off." The incident prompted a more thorough investigation than previous reports had received. Investigators reviewed Bergeron's dashcam footage, which confirmed her account. The sedan was visible in the frame at 2:41 a.m. Headlights bright, exhaust visible. At 2:43 a.m., the frame showed an empty parking space. There was no transition, no movement, no sign of departure. The car was present in one frame and absent in the next. Technical analysts examined the footage for evidence of tampering or malfunction. They found none. The recording was continuous, unedited, showing exactly what Bergeron had described. Investigators also discovered something that previous inquiries had missed. The parking space where the sedan appeared was not an original feature of the rest area. Construction records from 1974 showed 17 parking spaces in the original design. The space where the sedan appeared, designated space 18 inches current lot markings, was added in 1989, the year after Howard Prescott's disappearance. The addition was approved by the Agency of Transportation in March of that year, with the stated justification of improved traffic flow and capacity. No one could explain why an 18th space had been deemed necessary at a rest area that rarely filled its original 17. No one could explain why the addition had been approved within months of an unsolved disappearance. The records contained no mention of Prescott or any connection between the two events, but the space was there. And every Christmas, something returned to occupy it. The rest stop at Exit 17 remains operational. Maintenance workers still staff the overnight shift on Christmas Eve, though many request reassignment, and those who remain have learned not to approach the farthest parking space after midnight. In 2019, a worker named Christopher Nadeau decided to document the phenomenon. He set up a personal video camera facing Space 18 and recorded from 11 p.m. on December 24th until 7 a.m. on December 25th. The footage showed the space empty until 2:23 a.m., when a gray sedan entered the frame from the direction of the highway. It pulled into the space slowly, precisely, as if guided by long practice. The headlights remained on. The exhaust vapor was visible. The vehicle sat motionless for 3 hours and 12 minutes. At 5:35 a.m., the footage showed the sedan still in place, headlights burning. At 5:36 a.m., the footage showed an empty space. There was no visual transition, no sense of the car driving away, fading, or dissolving. It simply occupied one frame and did not occupy the next, as if it had been edited out of existence except no editing had occurred, and the footage was continuous. Nadeau submitted the recording to a local television station, hoping to generate interest in the story. The station declined to air it, citing insufficient verification and potential for misinterpretation. The footage remains in Nadeau's possession, shared occasionally on online forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena. Judith Prescott died in 2021 at the age of 84. In her final years, according to her daughter, she spoke often of Howard, of their life together, of the Christmas Eve call that was the last time she heard his voice, of the questions that never received answers. She also spoke of dreams. She said she dreamed about the rest stop. Her daughter, Karen Prescott Bellamy, told a reporter. She dreamed about pulling into the lot on Christmas night and seeing his car there, headlights on, waiting for her. She said she walked up to it and looked through the window, and he was inside, just sitting there, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. She knocked on the glass, but he didn't turn. She called his name, but he didn't answer. Karen paused. She said the dream always ended the same way. She'd reach for the door handle, and just as her fingers touched it, she'd wake up, every time, for 30 years. The Exit 17 rest area marks no memorial for Howard Prescott. There is no plaque, no marker, no acknowledgement that anything unusual has ever occurred there. The parking lot is plowed in winter, cleaned in summer, maintained with the anonymous efficiency of state infrastructure. Space 18 remains at the far edge of the lot, separated from the building by 50 yards of asphalt. Most travelers park closer to the restrooms. Most travelers never notice the space exists. But every Christmas, between 2 and 3 a.m., a gray sedan pulls into that space and waits. Its headlights burn through the darkness. Its engine runs without sound. Its driver sits behind glass that no one can see through, waiting for something that may never come, or returning from somewhere that can't be found on any map. The tracks lead in. The tracks never lead out. Howard Prescott has been missing for 37 years. His car was sold. His case was closed. His body was never found. But something still arrives at Exit 17 every Christmas night, and something still departs before dawn without leaving a trace. The rest stop keeps its silence. The snow keeps its secrets. And in the farthest space from the building, headlights burn until morning, patient, steady, waiting for someone to finally open the door. The recording was made on equipment he wasn't carrying, and that was only the beginning of what couldn't be explained. Quechee Gorge cuts through the earth like a wound that refused to heal, 165 feet deep, carved by the Ottaquechee River over thousands of years. Its walls layered with sediment that tells a geological story stretching back to the Devonian period. The gorge is Vermont's deepest, a chasm that draws tourists in summer and ice climbers in winter. Its depths accessible only to those willing to descend trails that switch back through hemlock and birch to the river below. The bridge that spans it, Route 4, connecting Woodstock to the upper valley, was constructed in 1911, replacing a wooden structure that had served the route since 1875. The current bridge is concrete and steel, utilitarian in design, remarkable only for what it crosses. Standing at its center, a visitor can look down into darkness that seems deeper than mere measurement would suggest, where the river runs cold and fast, even in the driest months. The Abenaki did not cross the gorge. Their trails skirted it to the north and south, adding miles to journeys rather than descending into or spanning the chasm. European settlers, less cautious or more practical, built bridges almost immediately upon arrival, structures that collapsed with troubling regularity, until modern engineering found solutions that the river could not so easily undo. Local histories record 37 deaths at Quechee Gorge between 1875 and the present day. Most were accidents, hikers who slipped, drivers who lost control, workers who fell during construction or maintenance. Some were suicides, the gorge serving as a grim destination for those seeking an end. A handful remain unexplained. People who went to the bridge and were never seen again, leaving no note, no evidence of falling, no trace of where they might have gone. It was these cases that brought Nathan Sawyer to Quechee in December 2011. Sawyer was 31 years old, a journalist and podcaster based in Portland, Maine, who had spent 3 years producing a true crime series called Northeast Unsolved. His episodes covered cold cases throughout New England disappearances, unidentified remains, deaths that defied explanation. He had a modest but dedicated audience, listeners who appreciated his methodical approach and his refusal to sensationalize. In the fall of 2011, Sawyer began researching Vermont's unexplained disappearances for a planned holiday special. His notes, recovered from his laptop after his own disappearance, show extensive research into several cases, including the Bennington Triangle vanishings and a cluster of unexplained deaths at Quechee Gorge. His interest in the gorge centered on 3 cases from the 1980s. In December 1982, a woman named Lorraine Fitch drove to the gorge, parked her car at the scenic overlook, and was never seen again. Her vehicle was found locked, her purse inside, her footprints leading to the center of the bridge and stopping. In December 1985, a traveling salesman named Bernard Okonkwo stopped at the gorge to photograph the frozen river. His camera was found on the bridge railing. He was not. In December 1989, a young couple, Teresa Markham and David Soto, parked at the Overlook on Christmas Eve. Their car was found the next morning, engine cold, doors unlocked, with no sign of either occupant. Footprints in the light snow led toward the bridge. None led back. All three cases occurred during the week between Christmas and New Year's. All three involved people who went to the bridge and vanished without explanation. None of the bodies were ever recovered from the gorge below. Sawyer planned to record an episode at the site on Christmas Day, 2011, when tourist traffic would be minimal and he could capture ambient sound without interruption. He checked into the Quakey Inn on December 23rd and spent the following day reviewing his notes and testing his equipment. On December 25th, he drove to the gorge. The last confirmed sighting of Nathan Sawyer was at 10:15 a.m. on Christmas morning. A gas station attendant named Muriel Provencher, working the holiday shift at a mobile station on Route 4, recalled Sawyer stopping to purchase coffee and ask about parking at the gorge. He seemed fine, Provencher told investigators. Friendly, a little tired. He said he was working on a podcast and wanted to record at the bridge. I told him the Overlook would be empty, nobody visits on Christmas. He thanked me and left. Sawyer's rental car was found at the scenic Overlook at 4:30 that afternoon, reported by a passing motorist who noticed it had been parked in the same spot for several hours. The car was unlocked. Sawyer's phone was on the passenger seat, battery dead. His wallet was in the glove box. His recording equipment, a professional-grade Zoom H4n digital recorder, a shotgun microphone, and a pair of Sony headphones, was not in the vehicle. A search of the Overlook, the bridge, and the trails descending into the gorge found no trace of Sawyer. Rangers rappelled into the gorge itself, examining the riverbanks and the pools where a body might have lodged. They found nothing. The search continued for 6 days. Before being suspended due to weather, Nathan Sawyer was never found. On December 28th, investigators obtained access to Sawyer's room at the Quakey Inn. The room appeared undisturbed. His suitcase was open on the luggage rack, clothes neatly folded. His laptop was on the desk, displaying his notes on the Quakey cases. His toiletries were arranged in the bathroom. The bed had not been slept in since housekeeping's last visit on December 24th. On the nightstand, next to the alarm clock, sat his recording equipment, the Zoom H4n, the shotgun microphone, the Sony headphones, all items that should have been with him at the gorge. All items that he had been seen carrying when he left the gas station that morning. The equipment showed no signs of damage or exposure to the elements. The carrying case was dry, the cables neatly coiled, everything arranged as if Sawyer had returned to his room and carefully put his gear away. But he had not returned. The inn's front desk had no record of his keycard being used after 9:47 a.m. on December 25th. Security footage from the hallway showed no one entering or leaving his room between December 24th and December 28th. The equipment should not have been there, and yet it was. Investigators examined the Zoom H4n and found a single audio file that had not been present when Sawyer left for the gorge. The file was 47 minutes and 23 seconds long. Its timestamp indicated it had been created at 3:17 p.m. On December 25th, approximately 5 hours after Sawyer was last seen, and more than an hour before his car was reported, the recording began with ambient sound, wind, the creak of metal, the distant rush of water. For the first 11 minutes, there was nothing else, only the acoustic signature of the gorge, captured with the clarity that Sawyer's professional equipment was capable of producing. At the 11-minute, 14-second mark, a voice became audible. It was Sawyer's voice. Investigators confirmed this through comparison with his podcast archives, but distorted, stretched, as if played back at variable speeds while being recorded. The words were difficult to distinguish. buried beneath layers of wind noise and an unidentified low-frequency hum that audio analysts could not attribute to any natural source. For the next 36 minutes, Sawyer's voice repeated a phrase, the same phrase, over and over, with slight variations in pitch and pacing but no variation in the words themselves. Audio engineers at the Vermont State Police Forensic Laboratory worked for 3 weeks to isolate and enhance the recording. Their conclusion, marked preliminary low confidence, identified the phrase as, "It's not a bridge, it's a door." The phrase repeated 87 times in the recording. Each repetition was slightly different, louder, softer, higher, lower, as if Sawyer was speaking from different positions or at different times, all layered onto the same file. At the 46-minute mark, the repetition stopped. For the final 83 seconds of the recording, there was only wind and the distant sound of water. Then a single word, clear and undistorted, spoken in a voice that investigators could not identify. "Welcome." The file ended. The forensic analysis of the recording raised questions that no one could answer. The Zoom H4n's internal log showed that the file had been created on December 25th at 3:17 p.m. But the recorder's battery had been fully charged when Sawyer left for the gorge, and the log showed no usage prior to the creation of the file. The recorder had not been turned on. It had not captured ambient sound. It had simply, at 3:17 p.m., generated a 47-minute file, as if recording in real time. The file itself showed no evidence of editing, splicing, or external modification. It was, by all technical measures, a continuous recording made by Sawyer's equipment at a time when that equipment was supposedly at the gorge with its owner. But the equipment had been found in his motel room, and the motel room had not been entered. Dr. Catherine Moreau, an audio forensic specialist at Boston University, was consulted by Sawyer's family in 2014. Her analysis of the recording added another layer of impossibility. "The acoustic signature of the ambient sound is consistent with the Quakey Gorge," she said. "The wind patterns, the water noise, the reverberations off the rock walls, it's a match. But the voice doesn't belong to the same acoustic environment. It sounds like it was recorded in an enclosed space, somewhere with hard walls and minimal reverb. A room, maybe, or a tunnel." She paused. "There's also the matter of the repetitions. 87 iterations of the same phrase, spoken over 36 minutes, that would require extraordinary breath control and stamina. No one speaks like that. No one can speak like that. Not continuously, not for that duration. And yet the voice is continuous. There are no breaks for breath, no pauses between repetitions. It's as if he never stopped speaking, or as if time wasn't passing the same way for him as it was for the recording." When asked what she believed the recording represented, Moreau declined to speculate. "I can tell you what the file contains," she said. "I can't tell you how it was made, and I can't tell you where Nathan Sawyer was when his voice was captured saying those words. The phrase itself, 'It's not a bridge, it's a door,' has never been explained." Sawyer's notes contain no reference to the phrase. His previous podcast episodes made no mention of bridges, doors, or any metaphorical connection between the two. His research into the Quakey cases focused on the physical circumstances of the disappearances, not on any symbolic interpretation of the site. Investigators searched for similar phrases in folklore, literature, and paranormal research. They found scattered references in various traditions, doors as liminal spaces, bridges as passages between states of being, but nothing that specifically connected to Quakey Gorge or to Vermont more broadly. One document, discovered in the archives of the Vermont Folklore Society, contained a passage that investigators noted but could not verify. It was attributed to an unnamed Abenaki elder, recorded by a folklorist in 1923. "The deep places are not what they appear. The river carved a path, but the path goes both ways. Those who cross must know which direction they are walking. Some bridges carry you over. Some bridges carry you through." The document provided no context for the passage and no information about where or when it was recorded. its authenticity could not be established. Nathan Sawyer was declared legally dead in 2018. His family maintains a website dedicated to his case, where the recording is available for public analysis. Hundreds of listeners have offered their own interpretations of the distorted phrase, some matching the official analysis, others hearing different words entirely. The Zoom H4n and its contents remain in evidence storage at the Vermont State Police Barracks in Rutland. The file has never been deleted. The recorder has never been used again. Quakey Gorge continues to draw visitors, hikers who descend to the river, tourists who photograph the view from the bridge, ice climbers who scale the frozen walls in winter. Most experience nothing unusual. Most cross the bridge and continue on their way, unaware of the disappearances that have occurred there, or the recording that suggests something about the gorge that engineering and geology cannot explain. But some visitors, standing at the center of the bridge on quiet days, report hearing something beneath the wind and the water, a voice, faint and rhythmic, repeating words that almost resolve into meaning, before dissolving back into ambient noise. They listen. They lean closer. They try to understand. And somewhere in the space between the bridge and the bottom of the gorge, between the road that carries travelers over and the darkness that waits below, a door may still be open, patient, invisible, waiting for someone to recognize what it is and step through. Nathan Sawyer went to Quakey Gorge to record a podcast about disappearances. He found something else instead. It's not a bridge. It's a door. The recording captured his voice saying those words 87 times. It captured another voice saying one word more: welcome. The road is 12 miles long, and the math has never once added up. Middlebury Gap is one of 5 mountain passes that cross Vermont's Green Mountain spine, carrying Route 125 between the college town of Middlebury in the west and the village of Hancock in the east. The road climbs to an elevation of 2,149 feet at its highest point, winding through national forest land where the trees grow close and the shoulders narrow to nothing. In summer, it's a scenic drive, favored by tourists and leaf peepers. In winter, it becomes something else, a corridor of ice and shadow, where cell service dies and the nearest help can be an hour away. The pass was first traversed by European settlers in 1786, following an indigenous trail that had existed for centuries before. The Abenaki used the route sparingly, primarily in summer months, and their oral traditions contain warnings about traveling the gap during the long dark, the period between the winter solstice and the new year, when the days are shortest and the mountains hold their breath. Route 125 was paved through the gap in 1937, part of the same federal works project that opened many of Vermont's mountain passes to automobile traffic. Construction crews reported unusual difficulties, equipment failures, surveying discrepancies, workers who quit without explanation after overnight shifts. The road was completed on schedule, but the final cost exceeded projections by nearly 40%, an overrun that was never satisfactorily explained in the project's financial records. The distance from the western approach to the eastern descent is exactly 12.3 miles. This has been surveyed, measured, and confirmed by the Vermont Agency of Transportation on multiple occasions. The drive, under normal conditions, takes approximately 20 minutes. And yet, the Vermont State Police maintain a file designated Route 125 Anomalies, begun in 1984 and updated with irregular frequency. The file is not classified, but it is not publicized, either a collection of incident reports that share a common thread too strange to investigate and too persistent to ignore. The earliest documented case occurred on December 24, 1984. A truck driver named Wallace Hebert was transporting a load of lumber from Burlington to Rutland, taking Route 125 through the gap as a shortcut. He entered the western approach at approximately 11:15 p.m., intending to reach Hancock within 30 minutes and continue south from there. He arrived in Hancock at 4:42 a.m. Hebert had no explanation for the missing 5 hours. He reported no mechanical difficulties, no stops, no detours. His logbook showed a continuous drive from the Gap's western entrance to its eastern exit 12 miles that his odometer recorded as 78. "I thought the gauge was broken," Hebert told the investigating officer. "But I checked it before I left Burlington, and I checked it again when I got home. It was working fine. The truck just drove 78 miles that weren't there." Hebert's fuel consumption was consistent with 78 miles of driving. His tachometer showed engine revolutions consistent with 5 hours of operation. Every mechanical measurement agreed that he had driven far more than 12 miles, for far longer than 20 minutes. Only the road itself disagreed. Between 1984 and 2023, the Route 125 Anomalies file has accumulated 47 documented cases. All occurred during the week between Christmas Eve and New Year's Day. All involved drivers traveling through the Middlebury Gap between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. All reported the same basic phenomenon: odometer readings that exceeded the actual distance by factors of 6 to 8, travel times that stretched hours beyond what the route should require, and gaps in memory that left drivers unable to account for where the extra miles had taken them. The cases share other commonalities. Most drivers report that their radios ceased functioning shortly after entering the gap, replaced by static or, in some cases, a low hum that seemed to emanate from the car itself rather than the speakers. Most report that their headlights appeared dimmer than usual, as if the darkness of the gap were absorbing the light rather than being displaced by it. Most report a sense of unease that built gradually as they drove. Not fear exactly, but a growing certainty that something was wrong, that the road was longer than it should be, that they had been driving for far too long. And most report seeing things at the edge of their headlights that they cannot fully describe. Shapes in the trees, movements in the shadows, structures that appeared and disappeared before they could focus on them. "It was like driving through a dream," said one woman, Constance DiPietro, who experienced the phenomenon in December 2003. "Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. The trees were the right trees. The road was the right road. But something about the proportions was off, like a photograph that's been stretched without you noticing." DiPietro entered the gap at 11:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve and emerged at 3:15 a.m. on Christmas Day. Her odometer showed 84 miles. Her memory held nothing but the sensation of driving, endlessly, through darkness that wouldn't end. The most thoroughly documented case occurred on December 24, 2013. Margaret Aldridge, 43, was a dental hygienist from Vergennes driving to her brother's house in Rochester for Christmas morning. She had made the drive through Middlebury Gap dozens of times and knew the route well enough to navigate it half asleep. She entered the western approach at 10:47 p.m. Her brother expected her by 11:30. She arrived at 3:12 a.m. Aldridge's case attracted attention because her car was equipped with a dash cam, a forward-facing camera that recorded continuously while the vehicle was in operation. The footage, she believed, would provide evidence of whatever had delayed her. It did not. The recording showed Aldridge's headlights illuminating Route 125, as expected for the first 4 minutes and 12 seconds of the drive. Then the footage dissolved into static, not black, not blank, but active interference, the kind of visual noise that suggests a signal being disrupted rather than simply absent. The static continued for 3 hours and 51 minutes. In the final 7 seconds of the recording, as Aldridge's car descended toward Hancock, the image cleared. The footage showed the road ahead, the trees on either side, and for a single frame, lasting 1/30th of a second, a road sign. The sign was green with white lettering, consistent with Vermont highway signage. The text was partially legible, "Welcome to," followed by characters that frame-by-frame analysis could not resolve. The sign appeared to be positioned on the right side of the road, approximately 100 feet ahead of the vehicle. Aldridge did not remember seeing the sign. She did not remember passing it. When investigators drove the route the following day, no such sign existed anywhere along the Middlebury Gap corridor. Aldridge's case included another anomaly that investigators could not explain. When she entered the gap, her fuel gauge showed approximately 1/4 tank, enough for the 12-mile crossing with reserve to spare. When she emerged, the gauge showed full. Aldridge had not stopped for gas. The dashcam footage, despite its static, showed no interruption in motion, no pull into a service station, no pause that would have allowed refueling. The nearest gas station to Route 125 was in Hancock, and it had been closed since 10 p.m. Her credit card showed no charges. Her cash was untouched. There was no receipt in her car, no memory of stopping, no explanation for how a 1/4 tank of gas had become a full one. "I've gone over it 1,000 times," Aldridge told a reporter in 2018. "I didn't stop. I know I didn't stop. But the tank was full. And my odometer said I'd driven 91 miles through a 12-mile pass. Someone or something filled that tank. Someone or something drove those extra miles, and I have no idea who or what it was." The Vermont Agency of Transportation has never officially acknowledged the Route 125 anomalies. When questioned by journalists or researchers, agency representatives have attributed the reports to driver fatigue, equipment malfunction, or misremembered details common in nighttime driving. But internal documents, obtained through public records requests, suggest a different level of concern. A memo dated February 2008 from a regional supervisor to the agency's central office recommended additional monitoring of Route 125 conditions during late December and requested funding for instrumentation to document reported discrepancies in distance and travel time. The request was denied, with a handwritten note in the margin: "No actionable data. Do not pursue." A second memo from 2015 noted that GPS tracking data from state vehicles traversing Route 125 during the December 24th to January 1st window has shown inconsistencies requiring further analysis. The memo referenced 3 specific instances where agency vehicles had logged travel times and distances that exceeded parameters by significant margins. No follow-up analysis was ever conducted. No further memos on the subject appear in the available records. Sergeant William Fontaine, a 23-year veteran of the Vermont State Police, who managed the Route 125 anomalies file from 2004 until his retirement in 2019, offered a rare public comment during an interview with a regional podcast. "We don't know what's happening in that gap," Fontaine said. "We've got 40-plus reports from credible witnesses, professional drivers, commuters, people who know the road. They're not confused. They're not lying. Something is adding miles to their trips and hours to their drives, and we have no idea what." When asked if he had a personal theory, Fontaine paused for nearly 10 seconds before responding. "I drove Route 125 once, in late December, back in 2007. Took it on purpose, just to see. 12 miles, 22 minutes, nothing unusual." He paused again. "But when I got to Hancock, I had this feeling, this absolute certainty, that I'd been driving for much longer than 22 minutes, that I'd seen things I couldn't remember, that the road had been testing me, somehow, deciding whether to let me through." He declined to elaborate further. The phenomenon continues. In December 2021, a college student named Derek Johansson drove through the Middlebury Gap on Christmas Eve, returning to his family home in Rutland from a friend's house in Burlington. He entered the gap at 11:18 p.m. and emerged at 2:44 a.m., his odometer showing 73 additional miles. His smartphone's GPS tracking, which should have recorded his route in real time, showed nothing between 11:19 and 2:43, a blank space where data should have been, as if his phone had ceased to exist for 3.5 hours before reappearing at the gap's eastern exit. Johansson reported one memory from the drive: fragmentary, and uncertain. A sense of stopping at an intersection that shouldn't have existed. Of seeing headlights approaching from a road that Route 125 does not connect to. Of waiting for something to pass before continuing on. "I don't know what I was waiting for," he said, "but I knew I had to wait. It felt like a rule, like something you've always known but never had to think about before." The Middlebury Gap remains open year-round, though the state recommends chains or snow tires during winter months. The road is plowed regularly, maintained to the same standard as other mountain passes, traveled by hundreds of vehicles each day without incident. But between Christmas Eve and New Year's Day, when the darkness is deepest and the mountains hold their breath, some drivers find that 12 miles is not always 12 miles, that time and distance bend in ways that maps cannot account for, that the road through the gap is longer than it appears, and that something waits in those extra miles that odometers record, but memories cannot hold. The sign that Margaret Aldridge's dash cam captured for 1/30th of a second has never been identified. Welcome to where? The road isn't saying. The road has never said. And the odometers keep counting miles that don't exist through a place that no map has ever shown. "23 people signed the guest book, and every signature was written by the same hand." Island Pond lies in Vermont's northeast kingdom, a town of fewer than 1,000 people pressed against the Canadian border, where the forests grow thick and the winters arrive early and stay late. The town takes its name from the lake at its center, a body of water that contains, improbably, a 22-acre island, giving the whole arrangement the quality of a riddle or a mirror reflecting itself. The region has always attracted those seeking isolation. In the 19th century, loggers worked the forests and left ghost towns in their wake. In the 20th, religious communities found the emptiness suitable for their purposes, most famously the Northeast Kingdom Community Church, whose controversial practices drew national attention in the 1980s. But before that congregation arrived, before the name Island Pond became associated with raids and custody battles and questions about faith gone wrong, there was another church. The Chapel of the Redeemer stood approximately 3 miles north of the town center, on a road that no longer appears on most maps. It was built in 1907 by a small congregation of Finnish immigrants who had come to work the granite quarries and stayed to build lives in the shadow of mountains that reminded them of home. The chapel was modest white clapboard, a simple steeple, seating for perhaps 40, but it served its community faithfully for decades. The congregation dwindled as the quarries closed, and the young people left for cities that offered more than Island Pond could provide. By the 1970s, the Chapel of the Redeemer held services only on holidays, its pews filled with the elderly remnants of families that had once defined the community. On Christmas morning, 1978, 23 people gathered for sunrise service. By noon, 22 of them were gone. Pastor Emil Korhonen, 67, had led the Chapel of the Redeemer for 31 years. He was the son of Finnish immigrants, born in Island Pond, educated at a seminary in Boston, and returned to the community of his birth to serve a congregation that shrank a little more each year. His wife had died in 1972. His children had moved away. The chapel was his life, his purpose, his reason for remaining in a town that offered fewer reasons each passing winter. The service was scheduled to begin at 6:30 a.m., time to coincide with the winter sunrise. The congregation, mostly elderly, mostly lifelong residents of the area, would arrive by 6:15, sign the guest book in the vestibule, and take their accustomed seats. Pastor Korhonen would deliver a brief sermon. Hymns would be sung. By 7:30, the congregants would return to their homes for Christmas breakfast with their families. This was the pattern. This was how it had been done for decades. At 11:47 a.m., on December 25th, 1978, a man named Douglas Breton stopped at the chapel to deliver a Christmas basket on behalf of the Island Pond Ladies Auxiliary. Breton was not a member of the congregation, but his wife was. and she had asked him to drop off provisions for Pastor Korhonen while she prepared dinner at home. Breton found the chapel door unlocked. Inside, the pews were empty except for one. Pastor Korhonen sat in the front row, facing the altar, hands folded in his lap. He did not turn when Breton entered. He did not respond when Breton called his name. He sat motionless, eyes open, staring at the wooden cross that hung above the communion table. Breton approached cautiously. He touched the pastor's shoulder. No response. He moved to stand in front of him, blocking his view of the altar. Korhonen's eyes did not track his movement. His face showed no expression. His breathing was shallow but steady. His pulse present but slow. "Pastor Korhonen," Breton said. "Emile, what happened? Where is everyone?" The pastor did not answer. He would never answer again. The Essex County Sheriff's Office responded to Breton's call at 12:23 p.m. Deputies found the chapel exactly as Breton had described. Empty, except for Pastor Korhonen. The pews arranged as if for a service that had recently concluded, hymnals open on several seats, candles on the altar, still warm from recent burning. The parking lot contained 8 vehicles, the cars of congregants who had driven to the service. All were locked. All contained personal effects, purses, wallets, coats. None showed signs of disturbance. The snow that had fallen overnight, approximately 4 inches, showed tire tracks leading into the lot, but none leading out. Footprints approached the chapel's entrance from various directions, consistent with 23 people arriving for an early morning service. No footprints led away from the building. Deputy Roland Theriot, the first officer on scene, documented his observations in a report that would later be flagged for its unusual content. It appears that 23 individuals entered the chapel for Christmas service and did not exit through any door or window. No tracks in snow. No evidence of vehicular departure. Pastor Korhonen present, but non-communicative. No signs of struggle or violence. Cannot determine how or when congregants departed the premises. The report concluded with a phrase that would become the official and inadequate classification for the incident: mass departure, cause unknown. The investigation expanded over the following days but yielded no answers. The 22 missing congregants ranged in age from 47 to 83. They included farmers, shopkeepers, retired quarry workers, and homemakers who had lived in the Island Pond area for decades. They had families, routines, no reason to leave, and no means of leaving without trace. Interviews with family members established that all 22 had departed their homes that morning with the intention of attending sunrise service. Several had mentioned looking forward to Pastor Korhonen's sermon. None had expressed any unusual concerns or plans. The chapel itself revealed little. The altar was arranged for communion, but the elements appeared untouched. The collection plate held modest offerings, a few dollars in cash, some coins. The hymnal selections matched the order of service that Pastor Korhonen had prepared and posted in the vestibule. The guest book was the only anomaly. The Chapel of the Redeemer maintained a guest book in its vestibule, a leather-bound volume where congregants and visitors signed their names upon arrival. The tradition dated to the chapel's founding, and the original book, filled over decades, had been replaced in 1965 with a new volume that continued the practice. Investigators examined the guest book as part of their documentation. What they found prompted a second examination, then a third, then a consultation with a forensic handwriting expert from the Vermont State Police. The page for December 25, 1978, contained 23 signatures, matching the expected attendance for that morning's service. The names were recognizable: longtime congregants, familiar families, the same people who had signed the book for Christmas services in previous years. But the handwriting was identical for all 23 signatures. Not similar, identical. The same loops, the same pressure, the same spacing, as if a single person had written every name on the page. The forensic expert confirmed that all 23 signatures had been written by the same hand, using the same pen, in a single sitting, and the date next to each signature was not December 25, 1978. It was December 25, 1928. 50 years earlier. To the day. The 1928 date prompted investigators to examine the chapel's historical records. What they found deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. On December 25, 1928, the Chapel of the Redeemer had held its regular Christmas sunrise service. The congregation at that time was larger. The quarries were still operational, the community still growing, but the format was the same: early arrival, guest book signing, service, departure. The guest book from that era had been preserved in the chapel's storage room. Investigators located it and turned to the page for December 25, 1928. The page was blank. No signatures, no names, no record of anyone attending service that morning, despite church records indicating that a service had been held and that Pastor Henrik Korhonen, Emil Korhonen's father, had delivered the sermon. It was as if the congregation of 1928 had signed the book of 1978, and the congregation of 1978 had never signed at all, or had signed a book that no longer existed in their own time. Further investigation revealed that 23 people had attended the 1928 Christmas service. The names, reconstructed from church membership records and family accounts, matched exactly the names that appeared in the 1978 guest book. 23 different people. The same 23 names. 50 years apart. Pastor Emil Korhonen was transported to the Northeast Kingdom Human Services Facility in Street Johnsbury on December 26, 1978. He remained there for 3 weeks, undergoing evaluation for what physicians initially suspected was catatonic depression, or a trauma-induced dissociative state. He never spoke. He never wrote. He responded to no stimulus, answered no questions, gave no indication that he was aware of his surroundings or remembered what had happened. He ate when food was placed before him. He slept when guided to bed. He walked when led by the hand. But there was no volition behind these actions, only compliance, as if the part of him that made decisions had departed along with his congregation. In January 1979, Korhonen was transferred to the Vermont State Hospital in Waterbury, where he remained until his death in 1987. His medical file, obtained by researchers decades later, contained a single notation from his attending physician that stood out from the clinical language surrounding it. Patient occasionally mouths words during sleep, unable to determine content. Night staff report that the words appear to be Finnish. Translation attempts unsuccessful, but one aide of Finnish descent believes the patient is reciting names, the same names in the same order, repeated throughout the night. The aide identified 3 of the names before requesting reassignment to another ward. They matched names from the 1928 congregation. The 22 missing congregants were declared legally dead in 1985, 7 years after their disappearance. No bodies were ever recovered. No evidence of their fate was ever discovered. The case remains officially open in Essex County records, classified under the original designation Mass Departure, Cause Unknown. The Chapel of the Redeemer was closed following the incident and never reopened. The building stood empty for over 2 decades, slowly deteriorating as weather and neglect took their toll. In 2003, it was demolished by the county after being declared a safety hazard. The land was absorbed into the surrounding forest, and within a few years, no visible trace of the chapel remained. But before the demolition, a historian named Virginia Bergeron photographed the interior as part of a documentation project for the Island Pond Historical Society. Among her photographs was an image of the altar, the same altar that Pastor Korhonen had been staring at when Douglas Breton found him. The photograph showed the wooden cross, the communion table, the candle holders, and a detail that Bergeron did not notice until she reviewed the images weeks later. Carved into the altar's surface, in letters so faint they were barely visible, was a single word, Odata, Finnish for waiting. Bergeron returned to the chapel to examine the carving more closely. By then, the demolition had already occurred. The altar, like everything else, was gone. The Island Pond congregation vanished on Christmas morning, 1978, signing their names in handwriting that was not their own, on a date that had passed 50 years before. They left no tracks, no vehicles, no trace of where they had gone or why. Pastor Korhonen sat in the front pew and watched them go, or watched them arrive, or watched something that human language has no words to describe. He never explained what he saw. He never explained why he alone remained. In the Northeast Kingdom, where the winters are long and the forests keep their secrets, the old Finnish families still tell stories about the chapel on the road that no longer exists. They speak of congregations that gather when no one is watching, of services that repeat across decades, of signatures that appear in guest books years before or after they were written. They speak of waiting. The chapel was built in 1907. It was demolished in 2003. But some who drive the back roads near Island Pond on Christmas morning claim to see a white steeple through the trees, in a place where no building stands, where the snow lies undisturbed and the silence is absolute. They do not stop. They do not investigate. They know the old stories. They know that some congregations never truly disperse. And somewhere in the space where the chapel of the Redeemer once stood, 23 names wait to be written again in handwriting that belongs to no one, on a date that hasn't arrived yet, or perhaps has already passed. Odota, waiting. The border is 2 miles away, and something keeps crossing it in the wrong direction. Montgomery Center sits in the far northwestern corner of Vermont, where the Green Mountains give way to the gentler hills that roll toward Quebec. The town is small, fewer than 1,200 people, and quiet in the way that border communities often become, existing in the space between two nations without fully belonging to either. Route 118 runs through its center, climbing north toward the Canadian line at a crossing that sees little traffic compared to the major ports of entry at Derby Line or Highgate Springs. The crossing at Montgomery Center is staffed intermittently, its hours limited, its booth sometimes empty for days during the winter months when the roads are treacherous and the tourists have gone home. For most of the year, it is a forgotten seam in the fabric that separates two countries, a place where the distinction between here and there feels arbitrary, where the forest is the same on both sides and the cold doesn't recognize any border. But the locals recognize something else. They call it the Christmas drift, a term that appears in no official documentation but passes through conversations in the general store, at the volunteer fire department, in the homes where families have lived for generations and noticed things that newcomers haven't learned to see. The drift is not a storm, though it sometimes coincides with weather. It is not a migration, though something does seem to move. It is a pattern, recurring and unexplained, that surfaces every decade during the week between Christmas and New Year's. The pattern begins with an abandoned car. The first documented case occurred on December 26, 1995. A station wagon belonging to Lucille Gagnon, 71, was found on the shoulder of Route 118, approximately 1 mile south of the Canadian border. The vehicle was parked neatly, not skidded or stalled, as if Gagnon had simply decided to stop and step out. The driver's side door hung open. The engine was off, but the keys remained in the ignition. Gagnon's purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet inside, cash and credit cards untouched. The only thing missing was a hairbrush. Gagnon's daughter, Michelle, confirmed that her mother always kept a wooden-handled hairbrush in the center console, a brush she'd owned for over 30 years, purchased during a trip to Montreal in the 1960s. It held no monetary value. It held no particular sentimental value, as far as Michelle knew. It was simply something her mother had, something she used, something that was always there. Until it wasn't. Lucille Gagnon was never found. Search teams covered the surrounding woods, the roadside ditches, the fields that stretched toward the border. They found no footprints in the light snow, no tracks leading from the vehicle, no indication of where she might have gone. Her medical history showed no signs of dementia or confusion. Her recent behavior had been unremarkable. She had been driving to visit a cousin in Richford, a route she had traveled hundreds of times. The case was classified as a missing person, cause unknown. The hairbrush was never recovered. 10 years later, the pattern repeated. On December 23, 2005, a pickup truck belonging to Warren Dano, 48, was found abandoned approximately 800 yards south of where Lucille Gagnon's station wagon had been discovered. The circumstances were nearly identical. Driver's door open, engine off, keys in ignition, personal effects present and undisturbed. The only thing missing was a gas receipt. Daniel's wife, Renee, identified the receipt as one her husband had received 3 days earlier at a station in Enosburg Falls. It had been tucked into the sun visor, unremarkable, the kind of paper scrap that accumulates in vehicles and is eventually discarded or forgotten. He wouldn't have taken it with him, Renee told investigators. He never kept receipts. He just stuck them in the visor until I cleaned out the truck every few months. There's no reason he would have grabbed it. No reason anyone would have wanted it. Warren Dano was never found. The search followed the same protocol as the Gagnon case, with the same results. No tracks, no witnesses, no explanation. The file noted the similarity to the 1995 incident. No formal connection was established. The 2015 case involved a vehicle registered to a family from Burlington. Thomas and Eileen Fraser, both in their early 50s, were driving to Quebec City for a holiday vacation when their SUV was found on Route 118 on December 27th. Both front doors were open. The engine had run until the fuel tank emptied. Their luggage remained in the back, neatly packed, tags attached for the hotels where they had reservations. The only thing missing was a child's drawing. The Frasers had 3 grown children, none of whom had accompanied them on the trip. But tucked into the glove compartment, according to their daughter Sophia, was a crayon drawing that her youngest brother had made in kindergarten nearly 25 years earlier. It depicted the family's house with a yellow sun and green grass and stick figures representing each family member. Mom kept it there forever, Sophia said. It was just part of the car, part of the glove compartment, like the registration or the owner's manual. Nobody thought about it. Nobody would have taken it. Thomas and Eileen Fraser were never found. Their passports were in Eileen's purse. Their phones were on the center console. Batteries dead. Whatever happened to them occurred before they reached the border, within sight of a crossing they had intended to use, on a road they had traveled dozens of times. The cases attracted little attention outside Montgomery Center. Vermont has its share of unexplained disappearances, and 3 incidents spread across 2 decades did not constitute a pattern that demanded investigation. But the locals noticed. Raymond Pelchat, 83, has lived in Montgomery Center his entire life. His father ran the general store before him, and his grandfather homesteaded the land before there was a town to surround it. He knows the roads, the weather, the rhythms of a community that exists at the edge of 2 countries. The drift's been happening longer than those cases, Pelchat said in a 2018 interview with a regional newspaper. My grandmother talked about it. People going missing around Christmas, always near the border, always leaving something behind. The cops only started keeping records in the 90s, but the drift was here before the records, before the road was paved, maybe before there was a border at all. Asked what he believed caused the phenomenon, Pelchat offered no theory. I don't know what it is, he said. I just know it moves through here every so often, and when it does, someone goes with it. You can't stop it. You can't predict it. You just hope it doesn't pick you. The 2021 case added a dimension that previous incidents had lacked. On December 24, 2021, a sedan belonging to Marianne Kowalski, 39, was found on Route 118, approximately 600 yards from the border. The pattern held. Driver's door open. Personal effects present. A single item missing in this case. A reusable shopping bag that Kowalski's husband, Peter, confirmed she kept in the trunk for grocery trips. But the Kowalski case coincided with something else. A retired U.S. Customs and Border Protection agent named Dennis Lavoie, who had worked the Montgomery crossing for 18 years before retiring in 2019, contacted investigators after reading about the disappearance in the local paper. I wasn't going to say anything, Lavoie said. It sounds crazy, but after seeing another one of these cases, I figured someone should know. Lavoie's statement, given off-record and never incorporated into official reports, described an anomaly he had observed during his years at the crossing. Every Christmas, without fail, we'd see a spike in southbound crossings, he said. People entering the U.S. from Canada, coming through between midnight and 6 a.m. on Christmas Day. Not a lot, maybe a dozen, sometimes more. They'd have documentation, they'd answer questions, everything would check out, but something was off about them. As to elaborate, Lavoie struggled to articulate what he'd observed. They were too calm, too patient, like they'd been waiting a long time and finally got to where they were going. And when I'd ask them where they were heading, they'd give me a town in Vermont, Montgomery, Richford, Enosburg, and I'd say, "What's your business there?" And they'd smile and say, "I'm going home." Lavoie paused. But here's the thing. I never logged a corresponding northbound crossing for any of them. No record of them leaving the U.S. in the first place. It's like they came from Canada without ever going there. Like they'd always been on the other side, waiting for Christmas to cross back. Investigators were unable to corroborate Lavoie's account. Crossing records from the Montgomery station showed no unusual patterns during the Christmas periods he referenced. No southbound travelers matching his description could be identified in the system. But Lavoie's statement prompted a quiet inquiry within the Department of Homeland Security. A memo dated March 2022, obtained through a Freedom of Information request, noted unresolved discrepancies in entry-exit reconciliation at the Montgomery crossing and recommended enhanced monitoring during the December 24th to January 1st window. The enhanced monitoring was never implemented. The memo was filed without action, its recommendations lost in the bureaucratic machinery of an agency focused on more pressing concerns. The border remains as it has always been, a line on a map, a booth on a road, a distinction between here and there that means everything on paper and something else entirely in the forests that straddle it. Marianne Kowalski was never found. Her husband still lives in Burlington, in the house they shared, with the space where her car used to be parked in the driveway, now occupied by a vehicle he cannot bring himself to use. The hardest part isn't not knowing what happened, Peter Kowalski said. The hardest part is the shopping bag, that stupid reusable bag she bought at the farmer's market. Why would anyone take that? Why would she take it? It makes no sense, and somehow that makes it worse. If something valuable was missing, I could understand. But a shopping bag? A gas receipt? A hairbrush? He shook his head. It's like whatever took them wanted something that mattered to no one. Something we wouldn't even notice was gone until we looked for it. Something that was part of our lives without being part of our memories. The Christmas drift continues. Every decade, at least once, a vehicle appears on Route 118 within sight of the Canadian border. The door hangs open. The driver is gone. Something small, something insignificant, something that held no meaning to anyone is missing from the car. And on Christmas morning, between midnight and dawn, figures cross the border, heading south. They have documentation. They answer questions. They say they're going home. No one has ever determined where they came from. No one has ever found a record of them leaving. The locals in Montgomery Center know not to drive Route 118 during the Hollow Week. They know to stay home on Christmas Eve, to lock their doors, to keep their families close. They don't know what the drift is, or where it goes, or why it takes what it takes. They only know that the border is 2 miles away, and something crosses it every year that no checkpoint can stop and no log can record. The drift moves south, carrying faces that smile too calmly, carrying stories that don't add up, carrying the collected small things that once belonged to people who are no longer here to claim them. A hairbrush, a gas receipt, a child's drawing, a shopping bag, things that matter to no one, things that mattered to someone, once, before the Christmas drift carried them away. The crossing at Montgomery stays open through the winter, staffed when staffing is available, empty when it's not. The road climbs toward Canada. The forest waits on both sides. And every year, when the days are shortest and the darkness is longest, something moves through that no one can see and no one can stop. Going home. They say they're going home,